What do the Lion King, Blade Runner, and the iconic RTS Command & Conquer all have in common? These were games released by Westwood Studios in the 90s, and they didn't just print a lot of money, they redefined the industry.
George Lucas, like he was literally just mystified at how we could be making these kind of images. He's ILM, for God's sakes.
Lewis Castle, co-founder of Westwood Studios, found immense success in growing the PC gaming business in the late 80s and early 90s. But this legendary company had humble beginnings.
We were very unsophisticated. When we got our first check, we had no idea how to cash it. In fact, the IRS almost put us out of business.
But the acquisition by Virgin would change their lives.
I get this call. Hello, I have Richard Branson on the phone for you. And I'm like, I have no idea who this is. And he goes, oh, Lewis, my name is Richard and I'd like to buy your company. And I'm a smart ass. I go, well, I didn't know we were for sale. And he goes, my boy, in my experience, everything's for sale.
Lewis was flying high, but now the pressure was on to deliver.
Very early days of Westwood where I was not burning the candle at both ends, but I was throwing it in the microwave and just hitting burn. I had set my schedule up to sleep exactly 4 hours a night.
Then disaster struck. The Lion King team disbanded right at the start of production.
Now we have only 6 months to finish the game. We haven't even really started.
And Blade Runner? That contract was about to be signed by someone else.
The deal was done. EA already had it. So we go into the thing and we said, okay, well, our pitch for this is... We had talked to a bunch of people, and they just turned them all off. And I later found out from friends in the industry, they go, what did you do?
And the famous RTS Command & Conquer? They couldn't print enough discs after multiple delays?
We literally didn't manufacture enough discs. The channel went dry, and oh my God, Brett was climbing the walls.
How did Lewis Castle keep his cool and manage to produce so many hits against all odds? Well, today I sit down with Lewis Castle, and he reveals his story on Titans of the industry. Take me all the way back to the beginning.
Way back in the 80s, it wasn't very common for people to think of computers as art tools or even as production tools. You thought of computers as things that scientists use for computation. But at the time, I was in high school, and I knew I wanted to do something with art. I'd always been a painter, a sculptor, etc. And I thought maybe architecture would be a good career where I could have a pretty good analytical mind, but I had a good artistic eye. That would be something I would do. I went to a conference that was at the Rotunda Convention Center back in the day in Las Vegas, and I saw all these CAD/CAM systems, very early days of computer-aided design. And when I saw it, I thought, if I'm going to be an architect, I won't be able to fall back on being a draftsman, because I was pretty good at drafting, very quick and accurate. So I thought, okay, I better learn something about computer. And coincidentally, my friend Paul Mudra, he had a computer, Apple II, and I liked video games and things like that. So I thought, okay, I'll just buy a personal computer. So I worked as a busboy and back kitchen and a bunch of stuff for a while. And then when I got up enough money, I went and bought my first computer from Century 23, which was an Apple II.
Were you like one of the first kids to get a computer?
No, I mean, well, I suppose I was one of the first people. They weren't very common. Once I started going to the computer store, I met lots of people who had computers. So from my point of view, lots of people had computers, but it was true. Most people didn't have personal computers. They were pretty unusual. But that sort of sent me on a journey because when I started taking more of the art courses and everything, I eventually started looking at the computer in a different way. I didn't see it as a tool for doing lines and drawings. I looked at it as more of an art tool. And I imagined that one day there would be artwork on the walls showing computer images, showing video images, which was pretty much a stretch back then because, it had 7 ugly colors, But I could see it coming, I just imagined that at some point computers would have full screen video and they would all be very colorful.
And how old are you?
16, 17, 18. It was over a few years, because by the time I graduated high school, I had applied to all these architectural colleges. I got an offer to go to ASU with a full ride scholarship and an internship program as architect. And then by then I was starting to look for computer science as well. So I thought I'll take architecture and computer science. Well, it turns out they didn't have really much of a computer science department there, and they wouldn't have covered the scholarship if I had taken computer science. So I decided instead to stay in Vegas and go to UNLV in fine arts and computer science. So right out of high school in 1983.
So you get a full ride scholarship for architecture.
Right.
But you're so convinced that this newfangled computer thing is going to change the world, change the industry, that you just said, no, I'm going to actually spend money and go over here instead.
Boy, I wish that was it. That makes me sound a lot smarter than I was, I think. No, I didn't think I thought it was going to be a big thing necessarily. I really enjoyed it. And so I went to my dad and I asked him his advice. I'm thinking about just going to UNLV. I sell computers. I make decent money doing that. I did some programming for people at that time now. I had like a little business, a consulting business. I had plenty of money to pay for college if I wanted to. And I said, I think I just want to go and get a fine arts and computer science degree and just see where this goes because I really like it.
And how old are you when you're, doing freelance work?
18, yes, 17, 18.
Is this because like like, well, I'm 18, it's time for me to man up and start making money, or is it just because like, oh, this is awesome, this is something?
No, I did it because I wanted to have cash to spend on indoor skydiving and goofing around and stuff. I burned through cash. I wasn't terribly responsible. I enjoyed making money. I enjoyed spending money, and I didn't really think about it again. It's like what I started off at the computer store selling my time through these things called tech checks, and eventually just started out on my own. I started out at $10 an hour, then it was $30 an hour, then it was $60 an hour. And about $60 an hour, I could book a few hours a week, 10 hours a week at the most. And that was a lot of money back then.
Lewis is making a lot of money for the early 80s, freelancing with his computer programming skills. But he loves computers so much, he takes a job with the local computer store called Century 23. Now, Century 23 was Las Vegas's local hub where computer hobbyists would meet up to get information about the new personal computers which were just getting into people's homes at this time. This is fertile ground for finding early pioneers in the personal computer space. And being that this is the right place, right time, Lewis Castle is about to meet another future titan of the industry, Brett Sperry. But in the early 80s, Brett Sperry was just another young entrepreneur who was using his computer programming skills to make money. And Lewis's life would change forever when Brett came into the local computer store with a simple request.
Well, it came just almost organically by accident, I suppose, over time. For me, anyways. I barely knew Brett at the time, but he used to come into the store, so I got to know him as a customer of the store. He and Barry, one of the other guys that ends up becoming part of Westwood, were working with a computer company, a games company called Unicorn Software, doing educational software. Anyways, he was programming like games, full-on professional games, before I even really met him. And he needed artwork done. And I said, well, I'm a pretty good artist. I like doing artwork, and why not artwork for games? So at the beginning, we did a couple of partnerships together, worked on a couple of projects together where I was supplying the artwork. And I still remember the real pivotal moment was he needed a printout for one of the games he was working on. And I was at the store. And he said, hey, can I print this out in the store? And I go, well, we don't let people do that because it's, source code printouts are going to be 150 pages. I said, but I have a printer at home. If you want to buy a ribbon and a ream of paper, I don't mind if you use it. Come on over to my house and you can print it out there. And we were sitting there talking while the printer's going. And I showed him one of my projects I was working on, which was an animated, a full screen window on a screen for the Apple. But it was fairly large, about a third of the screen. And the character was running from behind like Dragon's Lair, Dirk the Daring. There were blocks coming at you in 3D. And so he was ducking under and jumping over and you could control the character. And Brett was just like, wow, that's amazing. How are you doing that? I go, well, I learned how to program assembly language because I wanted to animate, and I can't animate in BASIC. It's just too slow. So the Apple was quite underpowered. It was only 1 megahertz computer, and the screen that it had was taking up a lot of memory. It took a lot to move it around. So what I would do is every single frame, I would draw the character who was running from behind. And then as soon as he's done running that whole cycle on that screen, I would flip to the other screen that was being hidden. And so while I was showing the screen that was running, I was drawing all the blocks in order on the next screen for the next frame. So every 8 frames, the blocks came forward. So as a player, you would go back and forth. You could duck and go under the holes. You could climb over the top of those things. And so fairly straightforward, but it was the bag of tricks that literally made the Apple look like it was running 8 times faster than it really was. We started talking about it. He goes, well, don't you want to do something with this? So I said, sure, I can work together on a couple of games. And we went to work for a company called ACT. It's actually just a little bit before Westwood. Ultimately, with the two of us, just said, look, let's just go get a contract. It can't be that hard. We have enough business acumen. We'll get our first contract. And that's when Brett reached out to Bob Lindsay, who he had known, and said, hey, we're interested in some projects. What do you got? And that was the birth of Westwood, because our first project was a port of the Temple of Apsai trilogy. It was a John Freeman series of games for the Commodore, and we were going to port it to the Macintosh.
So it's official. Lewis starts Westwood Associates with Brett Sperry in 1985. During this time, the competition for personal computers is fierce, with many competing platforms like the Amiga, the Macintosh, the IBM PC, the Atari ST, just to name a few. This was a great time to be a software developer, as popular games would need to be ported to multiple PCs, which had their own individual architecture. But Lewis is only in his 20s at this point. He's still going to university, he's got his new role with his startup, Westwood Associates, and he still has his daytime job at Century 23, the local computer shop in Las Vegas.
I think if you think about Century 23, it had a very whimsical nature about it. These were hobbyists. We weren't professionals. I mean, it really was like a playground. We goofed around a lot, and probably things that would get you in trouble nowadays because we weren't always weren't always as kind to each other as we could be, I suppose. But it was always in the name of fun. It was always childlike mischief, you know. I think that playfulness and everything kind of rubbed off on everybody as like, it doesn't have to be misery doing work. Work can be fun. And being productive is kind of its own reward.
I've been in studios like that before where there's a lot of people that are having fun, and that shows up in the game. Yeah. And I've also seen other studios where nobody's having fun, and then you look at the game and it's like, okay, like it's there.
It's pretty dry.
But it's like, it's a 7. And I feel like the emotions that the team has comes across. And so when you tell me, oh, we were this whimsical nature, we were all just having fun, we're you know, playing pranks on each other, like, to me, it's like, all right, this is the perfect setup for a gang of guys to go build a game studio.
Well, yeah, and I mean, only a couple of us came from Century 23 originally, but then, of course, we recruited from there because that's where you would know people. Really, Mike was one of the people that was just the spirit of Westwood Studios overall. Mike Legg is just he was such a clown and such a good guy. He's still a very good friend. And he's still the same way. He still has this childlike wonder about the world that's just really fun. So I think it's a great observation. I mean, the culture of Westwood wasn't as deliberate as we probably could have been. Certainly nothing like Amazon or some other places I've been. But it was still a very identifiable culture. And you knew that when you were there, you had to be up for it. You had to be a little thick-skinned. Somebody's gonna play a joke on you.
Yep.
You had to have a sort of, not just a sense of humor, but you had to be able to roll with things. And you knew that, you know, people were just going to have fun. And that there was a lot of horsing around, but it was all in good nature. There was no mean-spirited stuff going on. And so I think that's really what it came down to. And there's lots of folks, you know, Laura Miele, who's the president of entertainment for EA now, was Westwood Studios marketing person. She came from architecture as well. And we hired her as an architect, as our first marketing person. She did an amazing job. She's incredibly talented. So
wow.
We got very lucky with so many people. It happened pretty quick. But at the same time, I'm going to college, and I still had my job at the computer store selling computers on the weekends. And I was still doing my contracting work because that was paying the bills. So I was pretty busy.
So, okay, so you're already this small entrepreneur.
I suppose so, yeah. I didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur, but I suppose so.
What, you're like, 20 at this point?
Yeah, 19, 20 years old. That's when I was like crazy busy doing all these things at once because I just was interested in all of it.
What did your
86.
What did your parents think about it at the time?
They were, well, my dad, like I said, I asked him his advice, and going back to the architecture thing, and he said, well, you know, if you were doing the architecture, would you still do the game stuff? And I go, yeah, it's my hobby. I really like it. And he goes, well, if you did the game stuff and that worked out, you know, would you still want to do architecture and drawings and all that? And I said, probably not. I probably wouldn't do that because if I could make a living doing games, that's probably what I would do. And he goes, well, you know what you want to do. You're just asking for permission. You should do what you want. And he goes, you'll be happier. So it's like blow my mind. Yeah. Yeah. Turn down that free ride scholarship, put yourself through school, go do something that he doesn't really even understand because that's something I want to do. So that's kind of my dad.
I think a lot of kids, they think about, oh, what will my parents think, right? Like you grow up your entire life of like, all right, let's not disappoint mom and dad. Let's not do this. And yet you get to a point where it's like, oh my goodness, like I think this might disappoint them. And then when they have that attitude, it's so freeing for a young individual to just go do that. It
is. And I think it's the best advice is, you know, it's your life to live. If you really want to do something, don't let people tell you can't do it. Go do it, you know, and especially at that age, you know, that you can make mistakes. Before Westwood got going, I had too many jobs. I had set my schedule up for a semester to sleep exactly 4 hours a night. And every other minute of the day, I was doing something productive, basically. So I would get home, I would hit the pillow, with like a minute before like 2 a.m, and I would get up exactly at 6 o'clock. And there was that kind of rigor. And then most of the way through the semester, I got sick, and I never really recovered. I mean, I stayed sick for like a month, and then I didn't do that again because I was just not sustainable. So that was just my work ethic, if you will. I don't know if it's an ethic or just I wanted to do so many things. There were just not enough hours in the day. So then as Westwood started getting going, it was just natural to get up in the morning, go do a run, get cleaned up, go to the office and work. And when it was time to go to bed, I would come back home and go to bed. And I had been putting in 80-hour weeks for like 2.5 months. And so you're like, okay, that's...
Were you crunching on a game or were you just working?
I just working. I mean, sometimes you were crunching, but I just liked working. I liked doing what I was doing, you know.
That intense level of work is what it takes to get a company off the ground. But to be a titan in this industry, you can't just be constantly working. At some point, you burn out. So you need to figure out ways to scale your business and work smart before that burnout gets to you. Now, Lewis would be faced with an interesting dilemma. Remember the reason why they called themselves Westwood Associates and not Westwood Studios? Well, that was because they wanted to look like other software development companies who could create original software products. Maybe business, maybe tools, not just games, to be nimble in case they needed to pivot. To scale Westwood further, they would need to hire more talent, which could alter the course of their company. This put Westwood at a crossroads. Do they take the company in a direction of making games? Or do they use their technical skills to make tools for other people? Or even worse, make business software?
I think Westwood was an experience-focused studio. Like, we were trying to get to the experience we could get to for the customer as quickly and better as possible. Because my background in fine arts, Brett's also architecture, we had the very lucky stroke of having Rick Parks come aboard as an artist for us. He was one of the most phenomenal artists at the time, the Amiga, still legendary Amiga artist. When we had all these artistic influences, we were always trying to figure out how to make these computers do art and animation that they really weren't designed to do.
Typically, when people create technology that is leagues above what other people are doing, there's an incentive to try to commercialize and sell that. Sure. And there are other studios you can think of through history, like id Software, Epic Games, where they've tried to commercialize their game engines and their tools so that they could get, so other people can make those games. Why did you, as Westwood, choose to stay focused on games and not go down the tools route?
I think because most of the time we were pulling all sorts of tricks. Like, I'll give you an example. When we first started on the Amiga, it was very early days, and Intuition and the graphics libraries were not very well polished. There were still lots of bugs, and they weren't well documented. So one of the first things I did is I said, look, I'm just going to dump the whole operating system. So I literally threw out the operating system, looked up the schematics on how to write drivers, wrote my own drivers to talk to the disk drive and all that. So the early games like California Games, World Games, stuff like that, on the Amiga, it wasn't running the Amiga's operating system. It was running our own very cut back version of the operating system. First of all, it wasn't technically proper. Later, we had to fix that. Second of all, we couldn't, well, how do you commercialize that? It's like, it would be like everything is bespoke. Everything was made for a very particular purpose. So California Games had all this color on the screen because we were able to do things with Agnes Copper and the other chips that other people couldn't, because we had direct unfettered access to the chip because I wrote my own OS.
Yep.
So it's like stuff like that where you go, okay, that works for a while, but it's not really something you could generalize. Later when somebody does an emulator, if you didn't emulate it exactly right, our stuff just wouldn't run.
Here's a guru.
Back then, when Westwood was porting games, we were doing the 16-bit versions of the games that were 8-bit games, so they were basically original games. We would write them from scratch.
No source code.
No, we didn't bother anymore. Like, at the beginning, we used to look at the source code. And once we got to that point, we were experienced enough to where it's like, okay, we'll just look at the game, look at the assets. We might glance at some stuff just to see how they might have done something. But for the most part, we really just redesigned all the games themselves. I think in the case of California Games, we might have been the tip of the spear, actually, because we were doing a lot of the design without anything to go off, because they were co-developing it at the same time. We wanted to make the Amiga do a bunch of things that it couldn't do. So I was, again, using that operating system I mentioned before to be able to split the scan lines and change the colors many times. So we were able to get these really cool events where the backgrounds would scroll and they'd have all sorts of color on them that you couldn't really do. But because we were cheating, we did. It was a lot of fun. I mean, that was the first time where we did a games project where we were a little bit unfettered. We weren't trying to copy somebody else's designs, building them from scratch. So,
California Games would put Westwood on the map. This incredible game sold like hotcakes on just about every system it was released on. And the fact that Westwood programmed the game mostly from scratch gave them the credibility to build their own products. Now it was time to show that Titan spirit and to drive towards some original games. But it's a pretty risky bet to make a completely original game from scratch. So to de-risk these projects, Westwood would spend a lot of time and effort making games based off the Dungeons & Dragons IP, with games like Dragonstrike, and the legendary dungeon crawler, Eye of the Beholder. Y'all must have been a bunch of D&D nerds because there was a lot of role-playing, tabletop type games. You know, what's the impetus for all this?
Well, so D&D nerd is right. I had a campaign for like 16 years, so as a dungeon master, so I was very much into D&D, and we loved D&D. I mentioned earlier that we worked on some technology for SSI to get the D&D license, and so once SSI had a license, and we had been working with them for years, we were always trying to do D&D games, and so some of our very, very first, most successful games for Westwood would have been Eye of the Beholder, which was a D&D game. But before that, we had done Hillsfar, Dragonstrike, a Dragon Flight Simulator. I really wanted to write a flight simulator, so we just came up with a story to do a Dragon Flight Simulator.
So does that go just like, you know, you work with SSI, they're a pretty big company at this time.
They were still small
Really?
small and scrappy.
Okay, all right. I always envisioned SSI in the 80s as like, hey, they're like one of these more established guys.
They were definitely more established, and they were firm, you know. But they were kind of small and scrappy too. They never really got like an EA or, you know, Infogrames or anything like that. We went to them and said, hey, we want to do another D&D game, and they were doing all the role-playing games. Before Eye of the Beholder, they were doing all these gold box games. And so that was their bailiwick. I think we got 1% on everything because they were always using our tools. But for the most part, we weren't involved in those. So they gave us Hillsfar because it was almost like a MarioWare game. It was a bunch of side games that you did. But anyways, they had this world that they had done, Dragonlance, the Dragonlance series. And so we said, geez, we'd love to do a story in the Dragonlance series and do a game of flight simulators on the back of dragons. It was really more because I wanted to make a flight simulator than anything else. So we built it. It used a fractally generated terrain in real time. And
this is a PC game, or is this an Amiga game?
This was a PC and Amiga game. Yeah, Amiga, ST, and PC.
Wow, it's like 3 different games, essentially, because 3 different architectures.
Well, but I had written all of my tools to cross-port, so we were doing cross-porting.
So it was all written in C, but how did you manage all
like I wrote all, Dragonstrike was completely written in assembly language. It was all assembly language.
It had to have been. Like, how did you manage all those draw routines?
Well, I wrote all the math libraries, and it was definitely a PC game as well because PCs at the time didn't have floating point. They had floating point optional chips. So if you had a floating point chip, I had a math library that it would load in as a DLL, and so it would take advantage of your math coprocessor.
Yeah, I'm just hearing all this work. It's like nobody spends this kind of time to do it. They just go, oh, it doesn't do this. Not going to port it there. Or, oh, it doesn't do this. We'll just get some other companies. Let's just get someone else to do it.
The tools didn't really...
There were no tools.
Yeah, even the tools that were commercially available were good general purpose tools. But when it came to like a cutting edge game, you really couldn't use them.
You know, these games that you're talking about with these systems that interact with each other, that create dynamic gameplay, that when you play them, they're different every time.
Emergent systems, basically. Yes. Emergent gameplay is what you want. So.
These sound like, you know, this is stuff that you do 9 to 5 and go home, right? Or no?
I don't know. You know, I feel like I'm always thinking about things. Like my son, he also makes games. He's a designer. And he made a comment to me one time. He goes, because I'm telling him about my new crazy idea. And he goes, it seems to me like you come up with a technical problem and then you try to figure out how to make a game out of it. And I go, well, that's not exactly right. I come up with a thing I want to do, and I know it can't be done traditionally. I noodle on, what could I do to make that happen? Some ideas I'm thinking about even now is like, okay, I really like the idea of moving environments, lots of things moving at once, but when you have a lot of objects moving at once and you're playing with a lot of people, it just overwhelms the internet speed. So what can you do to make a lot of objects be able to move synchronously across the internet without having to synchronize it on the data streams? And I go all the way back to some games I made way back on the Apple, which were bullet hells, where I used formulas to run the bullets instead of actually tracking every single bullet. As long as you were synchronized on both sides, your clocks were synchronized, you could guarantee that the outcome was exactly the same on both sides. So then I'm thinking, well, what if you took that idea and applied it to something else? You could actually have a lot of things moving all at once, and you wouldn't have to have all this network traffic. So that's kind of how my brain works, and it still works that way to this day. So anyways, that's the kind of stuff that still excites me about the games industry, is that there's still some cheap trick to do, or something that just creates a moment of wow, a moment of awe. It's not without purpose. Like the reason I want to do that is something that was shared with me a long time ago, is things that are generally predictable but specifically surprising delight humans. Our brains are we're always living in the future. Like we're wired to predict the thing that's about to occur. In our entertainment, whether it's a story or a visual or something, when those things happen and they fit our mold of what we thought was going to happen, but they didn't do exactly like we thought, that becomes delightful because it feels true and real, but it wasn't exactly what we wanted or what we thought. That's what keeps me going when it comes to the technical solutions, which is how do we surprise them with something that feels believable and feels within the realms of what they might have expected, but it's something they didn't quite expect the way it did.
Westwood Associates was profitable, had incredibly talented people, and had a proven track record of creating hits. So yeah, Just get a bunch of brilliant, motivated, talented individuals together, and you got a winning formula, right? Well, these people were going to get a visit from the government that nobody ever wants to have.
In fact, the IRS almost put us out of business the second or third year we were in business. We were very unsophisticated. When we got our first check, it was made out to Westwood Associates, and we had no idea how to cash it. So we actually had money in our hand before we filed the fictitious firm papers, before we got the bank account, before any of that. We went through that whole learning process. Well, similarly, when we got our first tax bill, and the accountants come back to us and said, right, so you owe, whatever it was, $10,000 or $15,000 in taxes. And we're like, whoa, hang on here. How can we owe that much money? We spent almost everything we made on hardware and people and all that. He goes, oh, yeah, but you have to amortize it. The cost of the hardware has to go over 7 years. So you're only able to take 1/7 of that money off. So you have to pay tax on the rest. So it was lucky that we had just signed another contract and we just got a signing bonus, because had we not had that, there was no way we could have paid the tax bill. So you learn. Like, this is how entrepreneurs who dive in head first, you learn things sometimes the hard way.
So it's crazy to me, because what I'm hearing here is, and you're being pretty humble about this, but what I'm hearing here is that here's a group of people that have a really great, maybe even insane amount of talent.
Yeah, there was some very talented folks.
And you're just like, let's just do the thing. And once you do it and you start making money, you realize, oh, wow, businesses require a lot of paperwork and attention and all these things that, aren't the core function, aren't the ability for you to drive revenue.
Later, when we got an actual agent, we realized that we weren't as good as we thought we were, but we were pretty good. I think Brett certainly had a passion for the business side of it, like human resources and, value statements. And we had forms. Right in the very beginning, we made forms for things, and we had processes and things. It was the back office stuff that since neither of us had ever had a business class or an accounting class or anything like that, you have no concept of what happens in the back office. But you figured out the kind of hard and bumpy ways in the first couple of years anyways.
So wait a second here. Hold on a second. You're running a business. Uh-huh. You've got a group of people. Typically, they all support each other.
Yeah.
Nobody has any business experience.
Nobody. I mean, not even any of our employees. Like, my assistant who ended up being the voice of Eva was Kaya. She had a degree in accounting, but prior to hiring her, I don't think we had anybody that even had ever had a business or accounting class. And to this day, I took an MBA program at Stanford, but I've never done an EMBA, but I've never done a business class or an accounting class. And even though I was an audit chair for a public company and all that, it was all learned on the job. So.
This mantra of learning on the job is what separates Titans from the rest. With all these early successes, Westwood Associates realizes their true purpose and rebrands themselves as Westwood Studios as we transition into the 90s. In this era, games are becoming a lot more sophisticated. The IBM PC is quickly becoming the dominant platform for games. Titles are becoming fully voiced, and the CD-ROM technology blew away the limitations that floppy and hard disks had. All of this combined required game studios to raise the quality bar. Game publishers like Sierra Online were one of the first to take advantage of these new technologies with the point-and-click adventure game, featuring 256 color VGA graphics, sound, music, and some games even utilizing the entire space of the CD-ROM and putting fully voiced actors on there. Sierra Online's wild success turned them from adventure game developer to game publisher. And it makes sense. You don't want to put all your risk into the boom and bust cycle of a few franchises, but instead spread that risk out across multiple titles. Westwood Studios would take their crack at the adventure game genre with The Legend of Corandia, a fantasy point-and-click adventure game that would appeal to adventure gamers who bought Sierra Online games. So, might as well approach Sierra and see if they could get Corandia picked up by one of the largest publishers of adventure games.
We went to go to see Sierra Online, and we had a game called Kyrandia. So we go there to get a publishing deal, because we had worked on the game. And instead, Ken Williams says, well, we don't really want to publish this game, but we'd like to buy the studio and make you and Brett creative leaders and take all that business stuff off your hands and put a COO in there, and you can just make games and we'll scale the company and you'll publish through Sierra Online.
So wait a second. Sierra is like,
They were big at the time.
all right. This is a great game company you have here. A great game.
Right. Well,
we want the company.
They didn't want to publish the game. I think I understood we weren't going to give up the IP if we published them. They didn't want to make their worst nightmare, which is another brand that they didn't own that was in the space that they had. So I understand the logic. They talked in ballparks. I think they said it's going to be $5 or $6 million is what we think we could give you.
Was it stock or cash?
Cash and then stock. So that would be transformative amount of money in our life, just like crazy amounts.
And you'd been working it for like, what, almost 10 years now?
7 years. So then we went back and we're sitting there, we're mulling it over, because it doesn't happen right away. I get this call. It's like maybe a week later, and the phone rings, and I pick up the phone. And, hello, I have Richard Branson on the phone for you. And I'm like, I have no idea who this is, though. You have to understand. All right. It's just a different world back then. There's no Google. He comes and goes, hello, Brett. And I go, no, this is Lewis. And he goes, oh, Lewis, my name is Richard and I'd like to buy your company. And I'm like, he just hits you. Yeah, like that. I go, and I'm a smart ass. I said, well, I didn't know we were for sale. And he goes, oh, my boy, in my experience, everything's for sale. Like, my colleague Martin, who you already know, will be contacting you, and we'd like to talk to you about it. I was just like stunned. So I go and I talk to Brett, and I go, this guy, weirdest call. I just related basically the same way. And he goes, who's that? I go, I don't know. So we knew who Martin was. We knew who Virgin was. So then we look it up and oh shit, the guy's a billionaire. Like he can actually do this. Of course, Barry behind the scenes. He must have already known because he wanted to, he's our agent. He was going to get a piece of it. He must have known. And he must have actually called Martin and said, hey, Sierra is going to try to buy Westwood. You better go do something. And then they decided this would be an impressive thing to do. Not realizing that.
So they're trying to do like a shock and awe with you guys.
Yeah, but it was just baffle. It was more about baffling us than shocking us.
So what are you, like in your mid-20s and some Richard Branson's calling you like, I want to buy your company?
Yeah. That's the next time I talked to Richard was probably 2 years later. Really? When he came to Vegas, we went to dinner with him. But it was like he put Robert Devereaux in charge of the group and all that. So, but it was clearly somebody set this up. There was no way it just happened, but it was pretty fun.
Okay.
I never knew who out of our little cadre of people who got that on, but clearly they did it to kind of impress us. And I'm sure if we were British and we knew who Richard was, we would have been really impressed. But it was pretty bizarre, is the only way to call it.
So you've got these two deals on the table. You've got Sierra here, which
and Virgin didn't want to pay a lot for us. They were like 1.5 million was the all-in cost, but they were going to give us a phantom equity. So they said, based on your profitability, you'll get a piece of the business, like a phantom piece of the business. So you get to keep owning the business. And we want you to keep running the business. Sierra Online was, we're going to give you a bunch of money. You guys get to be creators. Not that you could walk anytime because we had a non-compete, but the idea was you've got your money, set up the teams, get things going. If you guys want to retire, you can retire. It was a very different kind of tone. And Brett and I talked a lot about it. And my recollection, I mean, you might have a different story, but my recollection was, we just think we're pretty good at this. Like, we would rather bet on ourselves. We don't think we're anywhere near the end yet. The one thing was we were a little nervous because we had to keep putting our own money in to finish games. We could never get enough money from the publisher to finish the game we wanted to finish. Yeah. So we were constantly putting our own retained earnings back into the company, which mathematically is a very bad deal because we're only getting like 15 to 18% royalties. So you're paying 6x for those dollars if you think about it from that way. We're not getting the money from the front end. We're having to augment it. So all it came in is like, you know what, let's definitely sell. We're going to go with Virgin. We're going to take a chance on this. We were immediately slapped with a lawsuit that we had to indemnify against and spent almost all the money post-tax fighting the lawsuit. So we ended up with nothing but a go-forward deal.
Lawsuits, like who's trying to sue you?
So the game Kyrandia, gets announced and we advertise it everywhere. A company out of Florida calls up Virgin and says, we're suing you because we own the name and the story of Kyrandia, which we had paid for. And we had all the proof of that.
Got it.
But they had bought the company that had the original story. And they didn't bother to tell the guys that bought them that they had already sold it.
And so that had to be sorted out.
We had to litigate it, and we had to litigate it in 2 states because they put a cease and desist. They tried to do injunctive relief. It was a crazy mess, and it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars right away. Out of 1.5, you're spending almost not quite half, a third of it.
So Virgin made you front the legal fees because you were still independent?
No. When you sell a company, you indemnify them against any acts things. So Virgin didn't do anything wrong. Nobody did anything wrong. Even the guys suing us didn't do anything wrong. They were in their rights to believe that they had the rights to the story they did. We just had the proof that they didn't. What they were trying to do is put a lot of pressure on Branson and Virgin to write them a big check. And they're like, we're not writing a big check. You guys sold us this thing. You said that you owned everything, which we did. Yeah. We didn't do anything wrong either. It just cost us almost all the money that we made. So.
Damn, what a shame. With these legal fees eating up the cash payout that they got from Virgin, it changed the equation of how much money they got to pocket from the sale of their hard work. But this is ultimately a positive development in the end, because Westwood Studios is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Virgin Interactive Entertainment. This lifted a lot of the burden of having to shop around game titles to publishers. You know, not knowing where the next paycheck's coming from really makes it pretty difficult to make a game. In the end, Lewis would be successful in fighting off the lawsuit and can now turn his focus into making the next series of great games. One of those benefits of being under a big publisher like Virgin was their contact list. And Virgin's status and size meant they could easily call up movie and publishing folks to make licensed IP deals that Westwood alone could not make. One opportunity came up with the DUNE franchise, a popular science fiction book from the 1960s that had critical and commercial success, selling way over 20 million copies. 30 years later, Westwood would take the DUNE franchise and make it into a game that would give birth to the modern real-time strategy genre as we know it.
With Dune 2, we really believed the game. We had something. We believed something was really cool. From the art point of view, my art team was working on something that felt pastel-y and had a theme that felt like Dune, and I think it did a very nice job of, we studied a bunch of different sand to make sure we could get all the different permutations of sand on the little graphic tiles to feel different. And then Joe Bostic and Brett were working on the story and the design, the actual technical design. It was just fun. We were playing the game. We were having a great time. Everybody in the studio knew it was great. But it was very difficult to convince Virgin that a strategy game was going to sell.
Really?
Yeah, well, yeah, because strategy games didn't sell back then. They were always like several thousand copies, maybe 10,000 copies would be a hit. It wasn't like today where a niche can be a million seller. You can't do that back then. Anyways, with Dune 2, we had this game. It was coming down. It was named Dune originally, and then they came out with a Dune because they thought the project in Europe had been canceled, but it hadn't. They shipped it. So then it was like, okay, well, what are we going to do? Well, we have to ship it. We don't have time to go get another name, so it's just going to be Dune 2. And that was how disposable the publishing side of it thought of this game, because they're like, it's a strategy game, who cares? The original sales forecast was like 30,000 copies. We had 60,000 pre-orders. We sold 100,000 copies. And then we didn't sell anymore after that because it was widely pirated. It was just massively pirated. Because it was a single floppy disk. You could just copy it in a few minutes, and the copy protection was easily defeated. Before we were even out in the stores, it was already defeated.
But you knew you had something.
We knew we had something really fun. Successful. And everybody talked even about the game. That validation, and we had bulletin boards where people on the bulletin boards, when you did the statistical representation of how many people were posting, and you looked at the actual sales of other games, you could tell this game there were 1 million people or more playing the game. Like, there were just so many people playing it. We were set. Now, the sales department was very happy. They were happy to just collect the check and say, okay, that's fine. And then we started working on Command and Conquer.
And do you have the decision to do that?
When we were acquired by Virgin, that was one thing we had full creative authority. We could do whatever we wanted. Yeah. We could say yes or no to all the licenses, too. Dune was a license that was brought to us, but it was a proposal. We didn't have to take it. We decided to take it.
This level of autonomy was a powerful multiplier for Westwood. Not only was it obvious that the team at Westwood knew how to make games, but they knew how to make decisions on what would be big sellers. This full control and autonomy sets Westwood to change from a great studio to a legendary one. But getting there would come at great personal sacrifice.
I still remember Martin Alpa called me up. Now, my wife's pregnant with twins, and he says, hey, the guys that are working on the Aladdin series are going to do the next Disney Aladdin game. We have the opportunity to do another game based on a Disney franchise that hasn't shipped yet, that's still under development. And we were thinking Westwood would really like to do that. And I said, no way, absolutely not.
No, I don't like money.
No, it wasn't that. I said, no, I didn't want to do it because I knew it was going to be a ton of work. And I go, the movie's coming out in the fall, in the summer. I go, it's half a year. It's a crazy schedule. My wife's pregnant with twins. The twins are going to be born, end of the year, early next year. And Brett and I were talking about it, and we're like, it's not that we didn't want to work at Disney. We had done a lot of games at Disney, so we had already worked with them before. It was just more about this is just like simultaneously with the movie. It's just fraught with a lot of chaos and error and all that. And he goes, no, don't worry about it. The guys here will be able to help you with their tools, get you all set up. You're really kind of a support team. They'll give you all the core technology. You don't have to start from scratch. The great sales job. And then he said, if you come on down, we'll go to Disney and you can watch the first 5 minutes of the film. And if you don't want to do it after watching the first 5 minutes, totally understand.
It's the greatest opening of any Disney movie ever.
As soon as Rafiki holds up and it says, Circle Live, boom, and it says The Lion King, I'm like, bastard. Because you say, how do I not do that? Of course I got to do that. That's crazy, right? So I went back to the team. I pulled together a very small team. It was 13 people all together. And I said, okay, well, this is what we can afford. Because we had other projects going on, too. It wasn't like Westwood was sitting on his hands, We were working on Command and Conquer. We were working on Monopoly. We were working on some other big games.
So CNC and Monopoly are on the back burner.
No, not the back burner. They're the front burner. Lion King was the, well, I guess we'll get to it game, So anyways, we got together. And we went down and we met all the guys there and they showed us all their stuff. So we go back to Vegas and we've signed the contract. And I think it's like late December, early January. Martin's like, well, I have really bad news to tell you. He says, the guys from these companies have gone off to form their own company. They're not going to be here. But they got all this stuff for you. So they gave us all the discs. And I'm like, now we have only 6 months to finish the game. We haven't even really started.
Okay, hold up. There's a lot of things colliding here at once. So let's pull this apart. Dave Perry is a programmer, designer, and manager for Virgin published classics on the Sega Genesis like Cool Spot, Aladdin, The Jungle Book. But just as we found out, he spots an opportunity with a company called Playmates, who was responsible for a lot of the kids' toys in the 90s. David Perry works with Playmates to form the classic studio Shiny Entertainment. Shiny Entertainment would go on to make successful titles like Earthworm Jim, MDK, Sacrifice, and Enter the Matrix. But this left Disney and Westwood in a precarious situation. The team who was going to make The Lion King is now gone. And to make matters worse, their tool sets were completely unfamiliar to Westwood. It would have taken too much precious time to unwind and understand this software stack. And oh, by the way, the clock's ticking to get the game out in 6 months. Sure, but Titans just roll up their sleeves and put in the crunch time to make it happen. Right? You're forgetting a little detail here. This is Disney we're talking about, working on one of the most secretive projects in their money-printing animation empire. This was going to pose many challenges for getting the game done on time.
Okay, well, let's get what we can about the film. Send us all the stuff about the film. We got like a few drawings. Disney's like, yeah, it's real sensitive. We don't really want to share a lot of stuff. I'm like,
how did you know what was in the movie? Did they just show you drawings of the scenes and then give you descriptions like, here's what's happening?
We would get photocopies in the mail of the stuff that's written, proprietary and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, this is crazy. Like we're already a month in. We're already starting February. We don't know what the movie is. We don't know what the story is. We don't have any artwork. I talked to Paul Carossi over at Disney and I said, if we came down there and we just lived at the studios, could we have access to everything? He said, sure, that wouldn't be a problem. He goes, we're really just very sensitive about sending tapes out and all that.
Yeah.
So we said, okay, fine. We flew out to Disney in Orlando. We stayed there I think I was there for 28 days, 30 days, something like that. The twins had been born, but thankfully I had a lot of family to help out. But my poor wife, I left her home with twins and a toddler and disappeared for a month. Same work ethic came up there where basically the earliest they would let us on the set, we would be there like 7 in the morning, stay until they kicked us out 8, 9 o'clock at night because you just had to.
Yeah.
And lived at the Treehouse Villas, which was walkable to the MGM Studios, the trailers in the back. And it was fun. I mean, it was crazy at the time. It just seemed completely ludicrous, but that's how we got it done. It was not as bug-free as we would have liked, honestly. We had to get it out pretty quickly at the end there. Yeah. We had to make a gold master by the end of July.
But you passed submission.
We did. That's another story. We submitted to both Sega and to Nintendo at the same time. I go, if this one's not accepted, we understand you've got your standards and everything, but we've submitted it to both companies. And so if it gets accepted by one and not by the other, the one who accepts it, it's going to be in the box for Christmas.
You played Nintendo with Sega?
We just told the truth. We said, if one of you accepts it and the other one doesn't, I'm going to tell you, there's no way we're not going to ship it. I think neither one wanted to take the chance that the other company would have an exclusive of The Lion King for Christmas.
Help me understand the level of success that this game is.
So it was the most successful game Westwood had ever shipped up until maybe the re-releases of some of the Command & Conquer games like 15 years later.
Whoa.
We sold 4.3 million copies of Lion King. And that was like insane. It was insane.
Was that deal structured in a way like here's the upfront cost, we've licensed it, or was it a per unit?
Yeah, Virgin was a very attractive publisher to work with because they were willing to cut people in on the back end. That's how we got the Blade Runner deal. That's how we got Lion King too, because they were able to go and say, okay, look, if Disney's willing to pony up some of the money for development, we're willing to share more.
So there were revenue splits for each unit sold.
Yeah, everybody got a revenue split. That's how it worked. And then our cartridge, there was more expensive non-volatile RAM option, but we just couldn't. The cost would have been too high. And it was still an expensive cartridge. It's one of the biggest cartridges because we had 2 games in one. You had the Cub and then the Adult Lion. So basically you had
all those frames of animations, yeah.
Yeah, full sets of animation for both characters. The backgrounds, you would have had just as many levels anyways. Again, compression came in because it's like, how do you get all this stuff into a little tiny spot?
That makes a lot of sense to me though, because as a developer, if, hey man, you're asking us to do something really hard, everybody's gonna have to crunch their ass off, and yet if everybody's taking a share in those profits, like that makes a lot of sense, because then everybody had skin. Like, I want this to be as good as that it can be.
Well, we were owned by Virgin at the time, so it was Virgin and Disney doing the deal. And because it was Disney and Disney, like a lot of the money we were paying for the animation went to Disney. So it was a very incestuous situation.
That's some Hollywood accounting if I ever heard it.
Yeah, so, but it's like, if you're going to do a game based on a Disney animated film, who would you like to do the animation for you? I guess Disney would be a good choice, right? Yeah. So it made sense. Because of that, I think all of the mechanics and the math worked out. Now, after we did that, we did a demo for Aladdin 2, because we were doing all the 3D rendering for Command & Conquer and everything. So we did the Aladdin character, Prince Ali and Abu, in the run cycles and everything, and doing their kind of antics and everything from the original Aladdin game. But we rotoscoped those, the cell animation, and we made them in 3D. And so we pre-rendered them in CD and turned them into sprites. And so we had 3D, what looked like real-time 3D graphics running on the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. We showed it, and people were like, oh my God, that's amazing. We could not come to deal terms, because neither company thought the deal was as attractive for them as it should have been. Yeah. So they couldn't come to terms. So we didn't end up doing it. And about 6 months later, the very first game that ever used the same technique came out, which was Donkey Kong. Up until then, it had never been done. We wouldn't have beat them to market, but we would have been right behind them.
Yeah, it would have been probably just super successful, because that game was just like, it had a huge hype machine behind it. Wow. Imagine a world where Donkey Kong Country is followed up by a 3D animated Disney platformer with smooth 3D animation. Such a missed opportunity. But I guess some things are just not meant to be. The Lion King would go on to launch in early November of 1994 and would go on to sell over 4 million copies. I remember it being a hot Christmas gift at the time, and the game was beautifully animated and really captured the animation of the film. And just think, this money move happened in a compressed timeline of just 6 months with tools that weren't even useful to the developer. So just to recap, we've had hits like The Legend of Corandia, DUNE 2, and now The Lion King? That alone would have made the studio's run quite impressive. But Westwood isn't done yet. Westwood actually has another game in simultaneous development. This PC game comes from a vastly different genre. Monopoly gets mentioned a lot when there's Westwood. The million seller is crazy to me, but like, why? Why is your version of Monopoly so talked about like this?
Well, for a couple of reasons. The first, it was right when Windows 95 came out, and Windows 95 had opened up the internet, so you could play Monopoly with your friend over the internet. I wanted to put on the box 1 to 6 million people, for players, 1 to 6 million players, right? Because we thought that would be cute, but they said no, it's too
legal.
Too much legal in that one, yeah. So I think that's part of it, is that we were just at the right place in the right time. There was really the mics, Mike Legg and Mike Rayford did a beautiful job of making a really high quality, high polished game that just felt really good. And the artist did a beautiful job too. WinG at the time, I know this is something that Chris Hecker, a friend of mine, you could actually render a little frame in the middle of the screen to have an actual video. So we go back to Command & Conquer, all those video players that we were creating for Command & Conquer. Well, it wasn't that hard for us to make a little video player in the middle of the board that would play video of the little shoe jumping around and moving, and each one of the houses had a little.
So the graphics on this are like blowing people's minds.
Oh yeah, like this was like the production value on this Monopoly was so far beyond what anybody would have ever done. Like, it was just crazy talk. But we loved it because it was Westwood, were a bunch of dorks. In the beginning, we really liked Monopoly. By the end, we were calling it monotony. But in the beginning. In the beginning, it was exciting because we all grew up with it, and we said, well, it needs to be done well. And one of my contributions was I wrote the AI for the enemies. So
the enemies.
The thing that was important to me about Monopoly as a kid was trading. It was really a trading game. It really wasn't about the mechanics or the rules. It was about trading with other human beings. And it struck me that all the other games did a very poor job of having an AI that would run trading. And I thought, well, I don't want to make one that's just fixed because people will figure out how to beat it and then it's no fun anymore. So I created an expert system in Excel. It was a big Excel sheet that actually had a picture of the board on one of the sheets, and then all the math on it to basically run millions and millions of simulations. And I built the expert system that would weight all the future values of the properties and all the elements that you had in your hands. And so it would propose a trade. So it would say, if you and I were about to trade, it would say, oh, okay, the future value of this particular item you have and the future value I have are close, so I'll make this trade offer. Or I want this thing because it's very valuable to me. I'm going to trade a bunch of stuff that I think is worth less money to you and give you that, but it's going to maybe feel attractive because maybe I'm giving you a monopoly, but I'm taking a better one, or I'm taking the railroads or something. So there was all this math that went into that, and then it would run through simulations to test it against each other. But it was all basically a big expert system with a big table of weights of what you could weight. So what was really clever about that is you could, like we had one of them was Sally thinks railroads are icky. So we would just kill all the railroad values and she just wouldn't buy railroads. That was just her thing. So we could give them personality. So we had Fox Mulder, we had Scully from the X-Files. We had all these people and we would basically personify the trade. And the system was so sophisticated, it said, well, if you and I don't have a trade, but somebody else has it, I'm going to give you this, so you give it to him, and then you give this to me. It would do 3 ways. It would do 6-way trades. Really complicated trades. And so suddenly you have a Monopoly game that is playing a very good game of Monopoly because it's doing the trading, which is what really matters. Yeah. That's the fun. And it was so good that my son, who might have been 8 at the time, went to go play Monopoly with my mom and beat the hell out of her. Like again and again and again. She goes, this kid is a genius at Monopoly. How is he beating? And Tony is a genius anyways, but the way he was doing it, because the game trained him how to be a great trader and how to make these like inobvious trades. And so then my mom got the game. She started playing it. So that's why I think Monopoly is mentioned all the time, because it was beautiful, it was enchanting, but it had real meat to it. It had real depth to it.
So don't play Monopoly at the Castle House. I'm going to get destroyed.
They're all pretty good.
Westwood's Monopoly would end up as the 11th best-selling PC game in 1996, according to Next Generation magazine, even outselling classics like Quake, MechWarrior 2, and Rebel Assault 2. Not bad for a Hasbro board game, huh? So how was Westwood finding success after success so quickly? Well, at any given time, Westwood was working on about 4 or 5 games. And in the 90s, they were producing more hits than flops. This built the credibility within Virgin Interactive to allow them to take on projects that their publisher didn't even think would be successful. Westwood had created success in the real-time strategy genre with DUNE 2, Against All Odds. So it's no big surprise that another company, called Blizzard Entertainment, would try to repeat this success. They would go on in 1994 to ship the original Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, an RTS that needs little introduction. It further popularized the multiplayer real-time strategy game featuring many of the innovations that Westwood had created in DUNE 2, like gathering resources to produce units, and buildings all in a real-time simulation where the gameplay never stops. Now, competition did 2 things to Westwood. It gave them even more confidence for the market for real-time strategy games, but it also heightened the stakes for making Command & Conquer the smash hit it needed to be to compete against Blizzard.
So after DUNE 2, you ask how it gets to Command & Conquer. Brett says, okay, I want to make a game, but I want to make it a little bit more approachable. We can't do DUNE again because the licensing rights and everything else. We had the licensing to the film, not to the books. The books and the film guys were all arguing over who had rights to license, and so there was just like a mess. And it's persisted for years, by the way. So we started looking at new themes, and the original theme we had was going to be called Swords and Sorcery. Literally a medieval fantasy game of orcs fighting humans. Right, yeah. And so anyways, we were building this game and we were working on it, and unbeknownst to us, of course, Blizzard is working on the first Warcraft. We didn't know that, and I don't think they knew we were working on Swords and Sorcery either. So we started working on it in about a year maybe into it, maybe not quite that long, 6 months into it. Brett's like, it doesn't feel right. I just don't think fantasy is going to be big enough. It doesn't feel relatable. I want to change the theme and I want to go back to something that's a little bit more topical. So it was Brett's idea. He came back and said, the story idea I have is that the next war won't be fought between nations. It's going to be fought between terrorist organizations and nations. So GDI is going to represent all the world getting together to resist organized but dispersed terrorist network behind a charismatic leader who would do horrible things like blow up buildings. Of course, this became very real, but it wasn't, at the time this was fiction. There was no Al-Qaeda. There was no, at least not in our knowledge. It was a forecast of what a future war might look like. If you put yourself back in this time, the idea of terrorists, it wasn't part of the zeitgeist.
Not for Americans, yeah.
But when you talked about terrorists, you would talk about the Irish. And the fact that we chose Algeria, and the fact that it was like there were these weird coincidences. They're just coincidences. The whole idea, of course, became GDI and Nod, and that's how we started developing that. And that's when we started doing, we always had the little vignettes. Remember, DUNE 2 had these little story sequences which were animated, but they were like cell animation. And so now we had a CD-ROM, and the original idea is, well, we'll just do more of those. But it was like, that felt kind of cheesy. It didn't feel like it was really real. And what Brett really wanted was this idea that you're using your computer and now you're commanding battles halfway across the world and you're flying drones. I mean, this was genius, really. I mean, it's just like really, really thinking about what things might be like in the future. So he's busy working on all this story, and it's like that's when he came to me and said, we have to have a full screen audio video because it has to feel like it took over your television. And Brett came and said, we have this CD-ROM, it's a brand new medium, and we need to fill that 700 megabytes with stuff. Let's do some CGI, let's do some filming, let's just fill it up.
1X CD drive?
Single X.
Yeah, so 150 kilobytes, say, just run video.
Yeah,
full screen video.
Audio and video, full screen.
But yeah, it's
Just go do that.
No problem.
Right, go do that. We went and did the analysis, and I remember myself, and I think it might have been Chris Yates at the time, but Barry or Chris, and we went back and I said, Brett, it just can't be done. It's not that we're not looking hard enough. It's just this is impossible because the stream of data is 144 kilohertz. It's just not enough to fill a screen with graphics, and these systems are just not fast enough. You can barely blink the screen quick enough. You have to have a drawing routine that's incredibly fast. MPEG would existed at the time, but it wasn't hardware accelerated, and
there's no way you could do it in software.
No, there's no way. Silicon graphics machines couldn't do it in real time. Like there's nobody. We looked at Bink, we looked at all these other things, and they had a general purpose player, but the player, there's no way. It wouldn't, the data stream, it needed like 10 times the data stream. So Brett's just like, you guys are being lazy, just figure it out. And
like he Steve Jobs it. It was like, yeah, just
pretty
do
much,
it.
yeah.
Just
So
fucking do it.
the first pass we did, there were some compression algorithms I had done. I'd written a fast loader way back in the day on the Commodore 64. So I started with compression there. And then we did a graphics for Dragonstrike. I wanted to have a lot of these full screen graphics that Rick had done. And so I figured out how to compress those down for lossless compression. So I was into compression pretty heavily. So we used that at first. It wasn't even close fast enough. And then Chris reached out to a university, and we got a couple of PhDs that were working in vector quantization and these code books using Limpelzov Welch. And we got that running, and it worked kind of okay, but it looked really rough. And, it was just pixels. It was still not performant enough. So then we combined the two techniques and we got it running. We finally get something running, and we have just a sample video that Aaron had done of like a tank or an APC driving over some mountains from Max. And we're like, okay. So we got it running. We were so proud. We got it running, and Brett's like, well, where's the audio? I'm like, so we got to go back and get the audio. So then we go back and do, how do we take the stereo audio, make it mono, compress that down, use wavelet compression, stream it in with the things, pull it all out at a pixel level, get all that working. We get it all function. Again, we're all proud. We get it. And it's like, okay, now this is really fragile. Like, okay, so you need to know that when you're running this thing, if you're going to change a frame, we need to know what frame you're going to change on so we can load a new code book and preload it and all that. So we had all these technical constraints on it. The first things we get back are completely break like every rule. So we started making a little bit more general purpose, got it all working. And I said, okay, now whatever you do, try to change as few pixels on the screen as possible because it's really smart from frame to frame, but try not to do a lot of stuff. So the very next thing we get is static. I'm like, random noise, like literally the entire
Did you not
screen,
hear what I just said?
Random noise. I'm like, all right. So then I said, okay, well, we'll run a preprocessor on it that if we detect that something looks like static, because we know that we're going to use static, we'll just generate a noise generator instead, and we'll use that. And that was actually
And it was
really
baked
fast.
into the video. It wasn't just like hey, we're going to run static for a few frames and play the video.
No, it would analyze the video and say, this looks like static. I will replace you with static. So it was actually analyzing as part of the preprocessor, right? So what you could do is you could do the whole screen static, but also if you did it like the logos, if you remember Command & Conquer, it was like shh, and the logos would come in and out. Well, it would know, it'd see the static, but it would know that the video was video, and it knew to compress the video separately because it knew that wasn't static. So that worked pretty good. And then it's like, okay, so then the next thing that happened was the artists come back and they give me these big full screen fades. And it's like, once again, you're changing every single pixel on the screen all at once. So then I said, okay, fine. So I looked at it, and they were using 3-second fades or 2-second fades. But it was how we got to high compression was an understanding that RGB is not the way to compress video.
Oh, absolutely not.
Right. So
the video industry has moved very far away from that.
But I did something really tricky. If you think about RGB as the 3 axes for three-dimensional space, and you drew a line that's R equals X, R equals G equals B, right? That R equals G equals B line is essentially your shade or your value, because it's gray, grayscale, right? And then each one of the colors, how far you are from that line to the axes of any given line is the actual intensity or saturation of a color. And so actually that's how most of Westwood's stuff worked, was hue, saturation, and value. And that's what gave us all the great compression, because we could actually compress some colors over more others. It didn't technically do like a transform of RGB into HSV because it's too slow. It actually did the transform on RGB, but it used HSV as the mathematical transform.
You had an HSV based codec.
Yes.
Probably because YUV is way too difficult to calculate.
We had no floating points, so YUV would be very difficult to do with. So it's basically not even really true HSV. It was really
like an integer-based.
It's an integer-based approximation of HSV. It would do the transform based on integer math, because we didn't use any sine, cosine, or any of that. It was tables. So if you understand all this, so for those people who understand this, it was just the craziest thing in the world. But it worked. Like it was good enough, you know.
I think the best way to describe this is like you're basically like, hey, we have this audio sample, but we're going to run it through like a speak and spell.
There were a bunch of different predictive formulas that I found in one of the white papers on MPEG. They had all these formulas that were basically just based on the set of data. This formula would predict the next piece of data would look like this. I said, well, we can use a couple of those. Some of them were they were basically transforms, 4x4 matrices. We're not going to do that. So, but all the ones that were more linear that we could do, I said, okay, let's just try to do something linear. So the last bit was there's actually a flag in the bit stream that says this is an algorithm. So this algorithm will predict the next number of bytes. The way it worked was as we were analyzing all the video, we would look at the data that we were trying to create and say, if I use this formula, would it create this data at this time? And then we would do that brute force. And that's why it was so slow. Like we had racks and racks and racks of Pentium 5 machines crunching away on data all the time. It was incredibly slow because we did all of this pre-processing to try to get as many predictive things to work as possible.
You know what? I take a drink.
Yep.
Because it is a very good thing that the statute of limitations has run up for the MPEG patents, because I'm pretty sure if they hear this, they're going to go,
no, because we couldn't do the actual formula. We could just say, what is it trying to predict and why? And then you go, okay, well, that's informative. Let's go do something else, right? We couldn't lift it. Like our compression algorithm was called LCW, because Lou Castle's Welch thinks it wasn't LZW. It was something else, right? You know, we would have never had full screen audio video for Command & Conquer. That would have never happened if I hadn't worked on the micro illusion stuff, because that's what helped with all the audio compression. That was all the wavelet compression, because so many of these techniques had to get added together to make it work.
Well, I'll tell you, for my first employer that I work for, there are people who are PhDs and have done nothing but this for 20 years, and they are still figuring out new ways to compress video. And it's not because there's more power here, it's because somebody says, make this smaller, damn it.
Yeah.
But I want 16x the pixels.
We need a 4K screen. It has to be HDR, and by the way, we want to be able to stream it, and it has to have fault tolerances, because the internet's it's not an accurate place. So.
Video is an incredibly crazy and scary thing to solve as a computer science issue, and we just think nothing of it.
Yeah.
Are you the unfair advantage?
I don't think we had one. I think we were just scrappy. Maybe that is the unfair advantage. We were willing to try it, and we were willing to figure out how to do it on the cheap. I did a lot of things, but so did everybody else. I mean, it was like every one of you could grab any one of our programmers and talk about all the stuff they did. It was just incredible. And they did things that blew me away. Greg Hellstrom did a bunch of physics stuff, and back in the day when everybody was working with pre-computer, pre-organized meshes and everything, he was doing polygon soup. I mean, it was crazy stuff. So, and then most of the things I worked on, I was working with other people too. Like I said, Bill Petro did all the voxel stuff. So I may have had some crazy ideas and some approaches. In the early day, I did do a lot of the coding, but as time went on, there were PhDs that worked on that video codec. Without their vector quantization that they had come up with, none of the stuff I used would have mattered. But I was just grinding away optimizing it. So
I think for a lot of folks in the audience that are maybe a little younger, just understanding that we always are standing on the shoulders of giants, of people who have built some of these things before, so that, things that we don't even think about today, like I can compress a 4K HDR video and shoot it across the internet without issue. It's like at some point somebody over here is like banging a couple rocks together just to make this work on the incredibly limited bandwidth and compute capabilities back in the day.
But I think today it's still valuable. Like I encourage people to understand how things work, because a lot of times, even the technical artists and stuff, they might be building a really complex shader with a WYSIWYG, their component-based thing. But if you understand what these things are doing, you'll be able to put it together in a way that's more efficient and get the result that you want for a lot less cost. It's true even today. It happens all the time. There was ray tracing, then there was ray casting, then there's predictive ray tracing. And a lot of times, you could have done it a lot earlier. Like there's some things that people come up with and you go, oh my God, this is such an innovation. Why didn't we do this before? And it's like, because you didn't think of it. Like it's not that it couldn't have been done. It just didn't come up.
I think you raise a really great point, because there's a lot of folks that look at newer game rendering technologies and they go, what's the big deal? I've seen this before.
But they're still cheating like crazy. Like the games I'm working on right now, we're doing signed distance fields and we're using them in ways that are novel, right? For fluid dynamics and amorphic simulations and things like that. And because it's built in Unreal Engine, it's actually basically generating the mesh in real time using signed distance formulas, and it's inside the render pipeline. So you can use all of the same tools, but here's this magic that occurs. And I think this is true of games in general. We're always sort of pushing the forward edge, not because you couldn't do what we're doing. There's usually some guy in the 60s or 70s already did this, right? But they did it with massive mainframes. They didn't do it in real time. They didn't do it on a $300 piece of hardware, right? That's where it starts to become, you start to have to become a wizard.
Yeah, real time is the new magic, right? Because a lot of these things, you've seen them in movies, some of these effects in movies, 20 years ago. Amazing, yeah. With an offline renderer. Let's transition to Command & Conquer. You really pour a lot of effort into this game.
Yeah.
You know that it's way bigger than what your publisher thinks.
Yeah, Virgin's first estimate for that one was, Dune 2 sold 100,000 copies with the license that everybody knows, so maybe you'll sell 100,000 of Command & Conquer. Maybe. So the first forecasts are under 100,000 for worldwide sales and all that. And then we showed it at a trade show, and the trade show buzz was crazy. Then Warcraft came out. Then people were, okay, well, this can sell more than we think. And they upped the sales forecast to like another 50,000 or 100,000 or whatever. And we missed our launch window. By the third one, we were showing the video pieces. And I remember we were at E3, actually in the summer before Command & Conquer shipped. George Lucas came by our booth and he's like, how are you doing that? Because you guys are like computer, like what do you, like he was literally just mystified at how we could be making these kind of images.
How's this not?
He's ILM, for God's sakes. It's like who are you guys?
What am I paying for? LucasArts.
Well, our stuff was janky as hell compared to his, but it was just blowing him away.
So how many units did Command & Conquer sell?
It sold over 1 million copies, but not immediately. It sold hundreds of thousands like right off the bat, and we ran out of stock. We literally didn't manufacture enough discs, so there was like several months where the channel went dry, and oh my God, Brett was climbing the walls. He was so mad.
How long did it take to get a reprint back then?
It was right during Christmas, and so we were shipping all these games, and we ran out of stock. Well, all the other companies, all the other publishers, the EAs and everything, are using all the same pressing, so we couldn't get. It's not that they can't press them fast enough. We couldn't get in line to get them pressed, and so we went several months with the just dried up channel, which might have added to the mystique a little bit because there was a while you couldn't get it, And then of course it came back out and started selling. And by the time we had the reorders coming in and a lot of sales were picking up, we actually had the first expansion pack. And this was another idea that nobody had done this before. This was like the first time. So we shipped the very first one, which was Covert Ops. That thing sells like crazy. So we said, okay, well, let's go do another one. And Brett was like, well, I think that's a one-trick pony. I'm not sure we can do a second expansion pack on the same game. But let's try just changing the theme entirely. Like, let's do it with science fiction from the 1950s. Let's assume that all the crazy stuff that came.
So you made
Philadelphia
a standalone expansion.
Well, no, we started with an expansion pack that was supposed to be. You had Command & Conquer. You bought your $30. You added but it got to be such a big project. It became Red Alert. So Red Alert became its own game because as it started as an expansion pack, it was full price because we were like, okay, it's too big and it's too much in it. And then for Red Alert, we actually did 2 expansion packs. So we knew then that you could actually do multiple expansion packs as well. And meanwhile, of course, the market's validating it too because we did Command & Conquer, Warcraft 2 comes out, then we do Red Alert, and then StarCraft. We're doing like this with Blizzard, and then everybody's trying to make RTS games. Most of them are screwing it up.
Yeah, that's that is the gaming market in a nutshell. It's like someone finds product market fit. Somebody does it in a way where everybody said, there's no way this could happen.
Yep.
That's why nobody's done it, because it's a bunch of guys, you know, sitting at a publisher. They're like, I don't see the dollars for this. And then someone goes out on a limb. They do it on their own. And surprise, surprise, everybody's like, ooh, shit, there's money here.
The difficulty of being innovative is everybody says they want innovation. They don't really want completely crazy innovation because that probably doesn't have good market fit, you mentioned before, but they want something really innovative that's different. The difficulty is the way that you can feel confident that your dollars are not at risk is when you're looking backwards at all the products that have already shipped. So by its nature, the forecasting mechanism is based on comparable games. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. We're going to kind of squint our eyes and say this thing will be probably like that. But the real big explosions don't happen because they were similar to, they were this meets that. They were because they did something different. And they did it in a way that was either quality of execution or just a whole new idea that just really blew everybody away, and that becomes the new thing. So it's very difficult. It's a difficult business because you can't blame the forecasters. Somebody finds that mark, they hit it, and then suddenly everybody goes, oh, well, that's how it is. The same things in movies, too. That's why, weirdly, movies go through the same cycle. Like, you'll find that there'll be a Top Gun that comes out, Maverick. At the same time, you'll have a bunch of military movies that come out around the same time. Some of it's because the companies know it's coming, and they want the shine, the bleed off. And so they know if they do something quick and cheap, they'll get some of those customers. But some of it's just because the script got shopped, it finally got signed, everybody's talking about it. Somebody else goes, you know what, that's a good idea, why don't we do that? It's not as nefarious as people always say. It's some of it's just because that's the time, right? Fantasy becomes popular, then it becomes unpopular, and science fiction is popular, then it's not popular. Genres are the same way. They come in cycles.
You know, it's interesting hearing about, you know, these ideas that have been tried before, but they didn't quite find the quite market fit for it. And then I look at modding communities and just say, like, that is the place to idea mine, to say, you know, this is, because you can find product market fit really quickly with incredibly low resources. And it's typically new folks that come out there. And you look at, like, the id Softwares, the Valve Softwares, like, they end up hiring people from the mod community, like, hey, we really like this. Can you turn this into like a full game?
It's an interesting idea. I think that the reason larger developers and publishers don't intentionally try ideas in places like that in mod community is there's a certain authenticity of the fans that's required. And if you just take the ideas right out of the mod community, you better get the creative or you're going to get some real big bad blowback. Yeah. This is the thing that a lot of times people don't understand. Let's say that you're EA and you're making Madden. Somebody goes, I have a great idea for a peripheral that can work with Madden or this particular thing that you could add to it, and it would be huge. And it's like, sure, but they have 100 ideas that they want to do, and they don't have an unlimited amount of time and money. Everybody has constraints, and so it's like, well, they have to pick the ones they have to pick, and so that's why it's always so hard. Where somebody says, well, this would be great, so yeah, it would be great, but it's not as great as the other idea that they had to do. And same thing with the mod communities, like product market fit. It's hard to say, well, there's this idea out there that could probably work, but do we really want to take our AAA team offline to build that? And that's where it starts to become a little bit more difficult to get your head around.
That's the innovator's dilemma. Smaller companies with less expectations can do wilder things. But as you get bigger, you start to take less and less risks until another smaller company proves that there's value there. But I digress. Command & Conquer goes on to sell over 1 million copies in the first year and becomes one of the most iconic real-time strategy franchises in the 90s. That places us at the beginning of that real-time strategy boom that would eventually spawn an entire esports industry and be copied by many game studios later. Just goes to show you that when you build on small successes like Westwood had with DUNE 2, you can make something truly world-changing. At this point, Westwood Studios could have gone all in on Command & Conquer, producing sequels, expansion packs, and rode that wave for at least half a decade, if not longer. But I can tell from just talking to Lewis that he's got that Titan spirit and isn't happy unless he's innovating on something new that has never been imagined before. Lewis set his sights on the next opportunity that Virgin offered. This was with the Blade Runner movie, directed by Ridley Scott in 1982. Blade Runner was the very first visual example of the cyberpunk aesthetic that we still see around today in modern media. And it really drove forward a futuristic vibe where corporations are just as powerful, if not more powerful, than governments. It's also got robots and advanced AIs that look and sound and feel just like real human beings. And this is pretty futuristic stuff, but, things that we're still dealing with today. And it really brings a deep question of, what does it actually mean to really be human?
Blade Runner was a really interesting deal all around. First, you have to know that Blade Runner was my favorite film. So once again, a lot of times we did things because Brett or Lou wanted to do them. That's how it is with founders, right? So Martin Alper called me up and he said, hey, we've got this old movie that, you may or may not be interested in. It's kind of a cult film called Blade Runner. I'm like, yeah, interested. And he goes, well, it's been chopped around a little bit. He goes, I'm not entirely certain that the license is fresh enough and all that. He goes, I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure it's something we'd want to get into, but if you're interested and you want to pitch them, we can get them into the studio in a couple weeks and we can talk about it. I get off the phone, I'm like, oh my God, Blade Runner. I get with the team, I start talking and say, what are we going to do? We start talking about the games, and I'm always been about what kind of interactive experience can you do with a license that adds value to the IP. So my principle is, you don't want to have something that's parasitic. A lot of people would just immediately rush to Blade Runner. It's that scene where he's chasing Zora, shoots her through the glass. I'm like, yeah, that's not the film at all. The film is not really at all an action film. It's a terror film. You're always waiting for something to explode. Very similar to Aliens. So I wanted to make sure we could get that. And I was thinking about, well, how do you do that? You can't make a shooter. You can maybe do a stealth shooter, but it's not like 3D adventure at that point. Even with 3D cards, you only had a few hundred polygons. They look terrible. I'm like, I just don't see how you can do that. I said, well, what we could do is we could probably use some of this other technology that we have and cobble it together. So we started talking about it, and I said, I think we can do these pre-animated scenes like an adventure game where when you're clicking through the scenes, you never know if somebody's going to come in and attack you. So the whole genesis of the idea was a story simulator where it wasn't predictable. It wasn't a branching story. It wasn't this. It was actually simulating in real time. We had done this with Circuit's Edge, a game earlier in our career. And I said, it's just a really great way for Blade Runner because I can start to be a detective because it's different every time. I have to get different clues. It can feel all those emotional beats of Blade Runner. And I think we can get the quality there. And so Aaron was super excited. So he rendered out the opening sequence of Los Angeles with the spinner flying over the Watts with the fires going and all that. So he's working on the video and all that. So we go into the thing, we said, okay, well, our pitch for this is we really think we understand what Blade Runner is all about. Blade Runner is about this tension, this terror. It's about being a detective, but not really being a detective. It's really about being in search of yourself. What are you all about? Are you even real? Are you even a replicant? That's the thing that's really fun. That's the psychology of it all. One of the things we want to do is make sure that we could meet the graphics quality, that we had from film. So let me show you our pitch. So we put the VCR in, and it starts off playing, with the music and all that. And they're watching and everything, and you can see Bud going like, you can see his mind changing for a second. The spinner falls, and it goes, Blade Runner, right? And he goes, wow, how much of that was from the film? I go, none of it. And he goes, how much of the film do you want to use? I said, none of it. What do you mean? I go, well, we're not going to use a single frame of footage. We're going to recreate everything so it can be interactive. And here's the story pitch and all this stuff. And then we left. And I guess once we left, we didn't know this, but the deal was done. EA already had it. Like they were just finishing the contract. And I later found out from friends in the industry, they go, what did you do? What happened? And I guess what they just did, they were going to do, a standard idea was going to shoot her and all that stuff. And they talked to Martin afterward and they said, these kids, they know what they're doing. Like, they really get this. They get the franchise and everything. And so he goes, we need to figure out a way to do this together. Josh Goodfriend was the guy who was the one negotiating it. They had talked to a bunch of people, and they just turned them all off, and they decided to go with us. Because so it was the pitch. It was the pitch. It was just the pitch. Now, the deal took like 6 months to get done. It took forever to get the contract done. And while we were doing it, we started building more and more of the video pieces. And I think as we went on, they got more and more convinced that this was just going to be a really different game, just a different product. And it was. At the end of the day, we used the technology from Command & Conquer. Because the video render on Command & Conquer had to fit through this little tiny gate for the single-speed CD-ROM, it meant that the actual asset of the video was very small.
It loaded into memory.
Right. So we could actually load a loop, a few seconds of loop, and just run it in memory. So our artists could do anything they wanted to Mac. So there was no limit. So now you don't have one of these things where, you have to watch your poly count, you have to do your min maps, all that. Doesn't matter. You render whatever you want. You go nuts. But you only have just a few seconds on a loop. After half a minute or so, you start to see the same things going over and over again. And even when you're really clever, like you have something in the background that, like a circle, so it's 1/8 of a revolution in 8 seconds, so it takes 64 seconds before you're all the way around. You can do a few of those things, but at some point, you start to see all the patterns. we didn't just render the images. We rendered a pixel depth, a Z buffer for every single pixel on the screen. That got us one place where we could then composite things. So now we could have the character running around the world. They could go behind things just like our other adventure games. So that was really nice. And the character we originally had was just a sprite, and it looked terrible because the camera angles, we want to have all these different camera angles for the film. And it's like, okay, well, we've got to do something with the character that's not a sprite. So we said, well, why don't we do voxels? So we did voxels. That wasn't fast enough, so we made these slice models, which is a very specific kind of voxel that's made out of ring of slices that used a different kind of compression to make sure that you could actually get a radial outside of the object. So once we did the voxels, then we had the normal vectors also because we knew what angle the light was coming from. And then we would put the voxel in the scene and we would say, okay, based on the original max file, what's the closest light source, which one the most meaningful, and we could light up the voxel.
So you were doing real-time 3D rendering with lighting.
Oh, yeah. It gets better. So the characters moving around through the world, and you could see that when they moved through the world, they were picking up the light, and they actually could be shown from different angles and everything. So you're like, oh, okay.
I thought that was just a bunch of FMVs, like just compressed on disk.
Oh, no. So the characters were walking around. We had a mocap studio because of Command & Conquer, so we mocapped all the actors. So now we could take these little voxel characters, so we could put a little shopkeeper behind the thing, like mixing up some sushi, and they could have some different animations, so we could try to bring the scene to life. Still didn't feel good enough because we're like, there's not big enough things happening. So what we need is like a spinner that flies down through the street or the big blimp that goes overhead. So we said, okay, we'll render a separate video sequence of just the spinner flying down the street. Well, because the Z buffer and everything, it can fly behind the foreground elements. It can go over the top and fly down and even go around a corner. And it'll feel like it's just moved through 3D space, even though it's just a composite. The spinner takes all the light from the scene so you can tell it's being lit. But then we had a new problem. As the spinner goes along, it has all these lights on it, but the world isn't seeing the lights. So I said, okay, what we'll do is we'll store a normal buffer for every one of the blocks. And so we'll take real-time lighting from the objects that move down the street. So now you have a scene that's animating, characters are moving around, and all this shit's going on. And the spinner flies down the street. And as the spinner flies down the street, damned if the side of the wall in the alley doesn't light up because of the flashing lights. And you're just like, ooh, how's that happening? Like how does that even compute? And the one thing that happened very late in the process, I wish it happened sooner. We got all this working, and we were so proud with the way it looked. It really sold the film. We could have the characters going and everything. And then, I think it was Aaron actually said, how come we're not moving the camera? We have all these still cameras.
Stop feature creeping.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, we can't move the camera because, you can't loop it. He goes, but we have enough memory. We could take the scene that's looping. We could move the camera down a hallway to the next scene and have the next one looping. And then it would just be a one-time thing. And I'm like, huh. We really didn't know it would work. The first time we did it, it was the scene in the bazaar, and we had the camera here, and the character's running back into deep space, as an adventure would. And as soon as they hit a trigger, the camera pans to follow the character. And your brain just goes, whoa, what the hell? Because everything was being rendered in 3D, it all had the lighting, everything fit, the characters scaled perfectly, like it just worked right out of the back. And unfortunately, it came in so late, there are not that many camera moves, but holy cow, was it really cool. I mean, it was really like, it was magic. Oh, and I missed one bit too. At some point, it's always an artist, they did this scene on the roof and they had all these lights going through mist. So when you try to move the character, of course, mist is alpha. There's no Z buffer. So as you move the character through it, they would look really, really dark as they walked back into the sink. So we sat down, I was with Petra, and we're like, we know where the volumes are for the mist. We know what the caustic is. Why don't we just mark them like we do lights, and we'll render them in real time whenever the character's moving through them. So you could actually have the characters move through volumetric fog and lighting, all as a renderer, all as a renderer. Not a single thing was polygonal shaders or any 3D hardware or anything like that. It was all in a software renderer.
That is incredibly smart. And you knew your audience too, that the adventure game crowd does not have the 3D accelerator. I seem to remember that like Monkey 4 was like the worst selling game ever because they required it.
The characters would look better if they were polygonal, but they would have looked origami. They wouldn't have looked like the world. So that was one thing that Grayford always brought up. He goes, well, if we did the characters as 3D models with the 3D rendering hardware, we could still do everything else we're doing, but they would have been polygonal. But I'm like, just didn't like the look.
You've done all of this technical magic to deliver something that's not been seen before, not been done before.
2,800 animation sequences. The way we did the script was insane. We went and interviewed a bunch of writers, had them write sample scripts, and with a blind test. We ended up hiring Bud Yorkin's son. He wrote brilliant Blade Runner stuff because he grew up with Blade Runner. So it's like, it was a coincidence, though. We knew he was one of the panelists, but we didn't know which one's his sample was, so we chose it blind. So he wrote the story, and we said, look, when you write the story for this Blade Runner, this companion story, because it happens concurrently with the film. That's another thing if people haven't played the game. You're playing another detective who's also hunting the Nexus 6 replicants, but you don't know which ones are replicants and which ones are human, and it's random every time you play. The first one's always a replicant, the last one's always a replicant. The other 5, maybe not, right? So you actually have to go and be a real detective and figure out the clues, because if you kill a person, that's a crime. David Yorkin goes and writes this incredible story. We said, well, when you're writing this story, please don't throw away any of your spare ideas, because we know writers have all this scrap stuff. Mm-hmm. Please just write the main through line and then give us all the spare ideas, because what we want to do is we want to make a game that allows your story to happen but isn't fixed to your story. And so we did that. We wrote the script. And then David Leary had the really difficult job as the lead designer of taking all those bits and pieces and then creating all the other alternative scenes that could happen and all the different triggers that could happen to have those scenes. And, well, if I have a scene with this person and they're a replicant, then they behave this way. If they're a human, they behave this way. If they think I'm a replicant, they behave this way. If they think I'm a human, they behave this way. So every interaction had basically 4 different kinds of tone, emotional tones to it. This started just making this incredibly complex web of things, and the script just grew to this massive binder. It was just insane. Like, we didn't do what typical adventure games do. You take a picture, oh, that was the wrong way, you die, ha ha ha. It's like, no, we didn't do that. It's like, if this doesn't make any sense, just discard it. Only show the stuff that matters, and you probably know why they're talking to this person, because using your knowledge information agent, you would say, well, they're on the track to find the dragonfly, they're talking to the vendor, they're going to ask about the dragonfly. They're not going to ask about how's your soup today, right? So we would actually have a mode in the game where you don't have to do any menu clicks. You just click on the things you want, and the story just progresses very naturally from place to place. So Blade Runner was an amazing game in so many different ways.
It has been remastered recently.
Well, I'm glad they did it, because I like the fact that people can still play the game. When they did the voxel characters, they tried to improve the backgrounds by gauzing and filtering them. But the problem is now the characters don't fit anymore in the background. They feel obviously inserted. On top of all of that, they didn't get any of the volumetric stuff in. So whatever bits of code we had that were doing all those super fancy tricks are gone. And so the final look of it is, it just doesn't feel as cohesive as the original game. Even though the original game is objectively not as high definition for the videos, all the pieces fit well together. They all felt about the same, and this just doesn't, and so it kind of clashes.
Well, they did it again. Blade Runner would be another million-plus seller and win Adventure Game of the Year award at what we now know as the DICE Awards. But back then, it was called the Interactive Achievement Awards. This game was a critical success, picking up multiple Best Graphics awards that year. But in this point in time, the point-and-click adventure genre isn't growing like the first-person shooter and real-time strategy genres. Virgin Interactive Entertainment was actually losing about $14 million a year at this point with their entire publishing operation. And even though Westwood Studios as an entity was very profitable, the rest of the studios under Virgin were losing a lot of money.
Viacom decides that it doesn't want to keep investing in Virgin because as a company, Virgin Interactive Entertainment was losing a lot of money. We got to the point where they were going to shut things down and just take the loss. And then when they were doing the investigation, they saw that Westwood had this earn-out formula, myself and Brett, which go back to the whole how we sold the company. And they said, well, looking at this earn-out formula, these guys are making a ton of money. Part of the reason Westwood Games were so successful is because we had Virgin Publishing, and they didn't get a lot of software from other parts of the organization. We were shipping a lot of games. So you had a bunch of people, a big publishing organization, that basically we were what they had to sell, so they sold it. So anyways, getting back to it, Viacom says to us, and they said, well, we're going to sell the whole company. So they go start trying to sell the whole company. Well, somewhere on the line, they go to EA, and EA says, well, we would be interested in the neighborhood of $100 million. That threw Hasbro out the back. And Microsoft said the same. They said, well, what if we sold you the whole thing, Virgin and Westwood and everything? And they said, $50 million. They said, another $50 million? I said, no, $50 million. If you make us take it all, it's going to cost us money to shut down all the stuff that's...
Because it's the debt and everything that's...
No, it was duplication. Virgin was a great company. There's nothing wrong with it, but it was a big duplicative publishing agency all over Europe and the world.
So
So EA's like, we would cherry pick a few people and we'd have to shut it all down. We'd have to pay all the garden leave and everything else. It just cost us a ton of money. And there'd be a lot of blood on our hands. They just didn't want to do it. So EA was the one who started the conversation of just Westwood. Because up until then, IDOS had looked at us and a couple other companies. While we were still shipping games, we're still being constantly giving the tours and everybody gets to see all the games we're working on. I'm like, you know, but whatever. Microsoft said, well, yeah, that's definitely a preferable deal for us too. We already have a publishing organization. We don't really need a European publishing organization. I think Microsoft could have benefited more, but at the end of the day, it wasn't our call. Viacom said, okay, we'll sell just Westwood.
So you didn't have any input into who was buying because Virgin owned, or?
We had the ability to veto it. We could have said no, but we can't. We have a good reason. Like we wouldn't be able to say, well, we want to go at EA, not Microsoft. That wasn't, we didn't have that kind of leverage. We were part of the deal. We could say we don't want to go here because we don't want to be part of that company. There were a couple, I won't say name names, it's too catty, but there were a couple companies when they came around and looked at us, Viacom would say, what do you think? And Brett and I were like, we don't want to work there. But otherwise, no, we didn't have any say. It was really whoever did the deal with Viacom. They owned us, lock, stock, and barrel. We were the value. Myself and Brett were the creative leaders and the business leaders. So it's very difficult to extract us from the equation. So we had to negotiate a personal employment agreement with each potential suitor, and we had to negotiate a business sale.
I mean, it was probably still the largest offer, right?
No, actually, Microsoft would have topped EA if they had given Microsoft a chance. But Viacom went out. They said, we're going to make the offer with EA. We were on a Sunday night, and I was talking to Ruth Kennedy, who was the general counsel, and she said, we really need you to back off on the non-compete. And I said, we're not. We're not going to back off the non-compete. We have a 2-year non-compete. That's a lifetime in the video game industry. We're not going to a 4-year non-compete. We're just not going to do it. So that was potentially going to kill the deal with EA, but we knew that Microsoft had already agreed to a 2-year, and we knew Microsoft would top the bid because Microsoft's bid was a little lower than EA's at the time. And so 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we were listening to their earnings call just like everybody else, wondering if they bought us. We found out the same way everybody else did because we didn't know for sure.
Wow. So you could have been bought by Microsoft.
If we weren't bought by EA by 1 o'clock on the earnings call on that Monday, then that evening Microsoft would have bought us. What Ruth told us was, we can't recommend the deal with an only 2-year non-compete. She goes, we can't recommend it to the board, and if we don't recommend it to the board, it may not happen. I'm like, it doesn't happen. And then later, actually, Ruth, we had a conversation about it. She goes, I really respected the fact that you guys, it mattered that much to you. You weren't willing to cave on it. And I said, well, that mattered a lot. We didn't want to stop making games. So,
just crazy, just thinking about that deal.
Yeah, we were going to get paid either way, so it wasn't like money. It was...
What was your career? It's your future.
Yeah, it's like, what are you going to do? Microsoft had a great pitch. They left the studios very much alone and let them build their own businesses. And in some ways, maybe Westwood would still be around if we had been bought by Microsoft. So the pros on Microsoft was they're going to leave us alone, kind of like the Virgin deal. That might be great for us. So that's why we're happy to do it. But it is a big company. And, there's some risk that they might have decided not to do games. That didn't happen, but you never know.
I mean, it's the late 90s, right? Like, it's not, the Xbox is not a thing yet.
They had lots of signs that they were committed to games, but they were not, it wasn't like today where, of course, you would never expect them to back away. But at the time, you never knew.
So you've become part of EA now. Mm-hmm. The honeymoon is over. Everything, is coming to fruition. You're building games.
Yeah.
The prevailing opinion is that under EA's lead, that they killed Westwood.
Yeah, and I think that's a little unfair. EA, when they bought us, said, we're not going to mess with you. We're not going to screw with you. You guys go do your thing, do your game, do your studio, all that. We don't expect you to change for us. That was definitely said time and time and time again. I think it was genuinely meant. They also said, do whatever you want. Build whatever you want. And Brett and I had all these other game ideas we wanted to build. We wanted to build an MMO. We wanted to build a first-person shooter. So we just sort of said, okay, we're going to start building, some of these crazy, big, ambitious games. Some of them have already started, but others not so much. The one thing EA did say is like, we really don't want those other things that you're doing, those small, the monopolies of the world and stuff. We don't want that stuff. If you came to us and said you want to make a point and click adventure, we'd just say, no, we don't want that. We only want your best and biggest ideas. It wasn't EA. It was our own hubris. It was our own, we have 5 teams. We'll just make them all AAA teams. We really didn't have 5 AAA teams. We had a couple, 3, but we didn't have 5 AAA teams. And so we were suddenly thrust in the world where everything we wanted to do, all these ambitions, all had to be EA quality, AAA super quality. And we just weren't ready for that. As a team, as a company, as a leadership team, we got way out over our skis. We were trying to build way too many different things all at once. In order to do the deal with EA and keep EA Pacific, we had to park Command & Conquer down there.
And just for context here, EA Pacific
Was the former Virgin studio.
and were they part of the deal? Did they come along?
Well, they were originally not. EA said they don't want it. They had a bunch of games that they were like, we don't want any of these games. They basically shelved all of them. So they had told us point blank, they just don't want it. We said, listen, we got Mark Skaggs down there. He did a great job turning the studio around. They're great, talented people. We can give them the CNC franchise. They can go build a Red Alert. So we can park the CNC franchise down there. They can use the tools. They can get it done, and they can reconfigure the studio. We want to keep the talent. Brett and I really did want to keep them. And that also changed things too, because then everything in Vegas was about all these new projects. So we're basically just doing a bunch of new projects all at once. That became Westwood Pacific. Westwood Pacific, after they had Red Alert, Mark Skaggs really wanted to be on his own, so he became EA Pacific. They broke off from Westwood, which was fine. I mean, they were perfectly capable of managing their own world. At the time, it felt pretty hard to give up, but whatever. We were still busy doing our other stuff. We actually did do a pitch for CNC3 at one point too, but we didn't. That was after Earth and Beyond had shipped, and at that point we were going to consolidate to do a EA LA. But I don't think it's fair to say that EA destroyed Westwood. What happened was every single part of EA was like a death by 1,000 cuts. Oh, we want you to be your own thing and everything, but there's this little accounting thing. We have to do the accounting this way. We want you to be your own thing, but you have to follow our payroll stuff because it has to be comparable to everybody else. And we want you to do your own thing, but you can't make this kind of a game and you can't make that kind of game. And it was like all these, like, again and again and again. I wish I had known what I know now, because I think I would have taken a different approach and right in the beginning said we need to assimilate and be as much EA as anybody else. We have to be just like them and probably be less ambitious and do fewer projects that are bigger hits. Like we had to be that. We had to grow up to do that, and we were still just coming off of a 5-year tear of just being able to do anything we wanted. We were successful in every category we went into, so we just thought we could always do that.
EA now wanted to focus on fewer games that could sell over 1 million units, as this is where the best revenue was. Just to put it into perspective, the Harry Potter games that EA was publishing accounted for over 10% of EA's yearly revenue starting in 2002, and would continue until EA filled their publishing rosters with mega hit franchises like Need for Speed, Medal of Honor, Madden NFL, and The Sims. As Lewis said before, working on multiple small games was not what EA wanted, so Westwood looked at the success of Ultima Online, which was drawing great revenue. Ultima Online was the most successful MMORPG EA had at that point, contributing about $25 million a year in revenue based off my napkin math of the EA quarterly filings. This gave Westwood confidence that they could ship an MMORPG to drive the continual revenue that every company really craves.
Brett wanted to do Command & Conquer Online, but before using Command & Conquer's brand, he wanted to make sure to do something that would let us learn how to make MMOs. So we started Earth and Beyond, and Earth and Beyond was supposed to be a simple game with a few spaceships, and it started getting, we need to have space stations because other games have space. It just feature creep, like lots of feature creep. And not to its detriment. I think Earth and Beyond is a great game, by the way. It's still, there's a server up there. Somebody reverse engineered the servers and stood it up. So it's obviously enough fans love it. We had about 80,000 people playing at the time, which was not insignificant. We were using the EA online infrastructure, which turned out to be abandoned in the future because it was designed to be a little too general purpose. But long story short is, Earth and Beyond was taking up a huge number of resources. We grew to 250 people. We had to open another facility, and just a lot of complexity got added by that. We were working on a game that was supposed to be like a Sid Meier's kind of Pirates, an homage to that for the PlayStation 2. And based on some direction from EA sales of, hey, if you could give us a female character that was a swashbuckling pirate, we would be able to sell a lot more copies of that. But otherwise, I don't know if we really want to ship a game. So we added a bunch of modes to it, and that's on us. We didn't have to. Nobody forced us to, but that changed the tenor of the game. There was a lot of things that we were going to do that were going to be kind of quick hits to see, like our old methodology of try something out. Like literally Dune 2. I mean, there's a lot of games that we just said, let's try this, let's try that. We were doing that, but when we would get to a certain point where it had promise, suddenly it would have to become that 8x return on investment that EA wanted to have to compare it to. So for them to put money into it, it had to have a potential that was like a Madden potential or a FIFA potential or a Need for Speed potential. I mean, these were giant games, so it's like, we need to have something to believe in, so you need to add features or just don't do it. Move on to something else. And it's like, but we like the ideas. So they could only do like 75 titles a year. They had studios all over the place. Everybody wanted to do multiple titles. I mean, the guys down in Tiburon, they had the right to do more titles. Everybody, any one of the studios that are building these big franchises, you could say they should have the right to do their original title too, right? Why not? But that's not what EA could publish. There was just a limit to how much you could publish. So,
And so EA really wants you to focus on like work on that title that you know that's already there, and then start to make it into a $1 million+ selling franchise.
I think that, and I think that's to some extent still true. I mean, that there's a limited amount of resources. There's a limited amount of titles they can publish. There's a limited amount of, so they got to say, okay, well, we have money. We can invest in things. We got to pick the ones that we think are going to be the best return on investment. They don't have a lot of room in their portfolio for experiments or for small trials.
Hold up. You might be asking, what's Earth and Beyond? Well, Earth and Beyond was Westwood's science fiction MMORPG that launched in 2002. And it was made at a time when EA was making their biggest online plays like The Sims Online and Motor City Online. The reason why most of you haven't heard of this game was because Earth and Beyond didn't meet EA's lofty expectations of $1 million+ sellers like a Madden or a FIFA. And if you look at the 5-year-old Ultima Online, they were still with 200,000+ subscribers every month paying for it. EA would shut down the servers for Earth and Beyond just 24 months later, leaving the game largely unplayable. Oof. By 2003, the writing was on the wall. Ultima Online was a one-off where EA even admitted in their filings to investors that they were still learning how to replicate that level of success. EA decides to double down on their strategy of $1 million+ sellers, and in the process, they closed down Westwood Studios in March of 2003. Now, they offered jobs to many of the employees to move to other studios as they were trying to consolidate all those workers, and some of them would go to a place called EA LA.
I do look back and say it's not fair to say that EA did anything nefarious. For lots of good reasons, we needed to consolidate a bunch of studios in the southern part of the United States because there's only so many executives, so much attention that you can have at the executive level, and all these little scattered studios with the DreamWorks up in LA and EA Pacific down, Westwood Pacific, EA Pacific down in Irvine, us in Vegas. There was another one in San Diego. It's like, okay, it does make sense to consolidate them all. I thought we would consolidate them in Vegas. That's what I wanted to do. Ultimately, Los Angeles just gave a better deal with John Batter down there running that facility. They gave a great opportunity for consolidation, and then it happened really fast, which was very unfortunate because I think we only had about a month's notice, maybe 6 weeks' notice that we were going to have to shut the studio down. There was so much stuff that was lost because, it was a rush to get it all packed up and finished. All of our archives was on these giant platters, these giant boxes that had optical disc platters, and so they were all packed up and moved. And then, 6 months, 8 months later, I went up into one of the areas, and somebody had opened up the discs and thrown them around and everything. It was the 2.5 terabytes of Westwood's history is now completely irretrievable.
So a lot of the history was destroyed in the move.
It was all just lost in the move. Yeah, that was really painful. And again, can't blame anybody. They never had a reason to set it up again, so it just sat in a corner. And eventually somebody opened it up. What's this? What's this? They don't even know what's in there. It was sad. And then a lot of the physical goods, like our archives and our inventory of, Westwood swag and all that stuff was basically, most of us thrown in dumpsters, and staff were just busy pulling it out to keep it from being thrown away. So, and I bought a storage unit for all the old costumes and stuff, and a couple years later gave them out to former Westwood staff, so.
Tragic. The loss of the source code history of a company that gives us the modern RTS is truly a loss for game preservation and historians. This is why it's so important to protect your data, as there's usually just one copy. And once it's gone, that's it. Many of the iconic games that Westwood worked on are of historical value, and they've got market value today. This is why you're seeing a remaster of old Westwood games being made. But they have to have a lot of extra work done recreating these games just to get them out there. It raises the cost to develop remasters, and it means we'll see less of them when this valuable material is destroyed. Please, game studios and companies, I urge you to please make sure that your data is backed up properly. It may not seem like there's a lot of value today, but this is your IP you worked hard to create. Protect it. Keep it safe. So with Westwood closed down, game over, right? Hold up. The Titan spirit is never broken by setbacks. And that's why when Lewis Castle was offered a position as the chief creative officer in the newly formed EA LA, he takes it. He never moves from Las Vegas. Instead, he's commuting weekly from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. Remember, there's no remote work practices or software infrastructure in place to facilitate this. So for the next year, Louis works hard to integrate the remnants of his Westwood team into EA LA.
So the first year was just, I was doing the job, I was there, I was 4 or 5 days a week, and I got to batter, and he said, well, we're coming up on your anniversary, is there anything we can do for you and all that? I said, if you don't want me around, we can part ways and all that. He goes, you'd be willing to stay? And I said, yeah, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I like the projects and everything else. And I know that I don't feel like I can be an EP on a project or anything like that because I felt like the remote location was a little bit difficult. I don't mind running some projects. There's some things I won't run the way that you and some of the other folks want to run them because I have a different style of management. I said, but I'm happy to contribute to all the things because I enjoy the job. So that ended up going another 2 years. And then Neil Young came down. They even asked me, do you have a problem with Neil coming in? I said, not at all. I'll work for Neil. I love Neil. He was Virgin before that. I think he came in maybe 6 months before the end of my 3 years. And I went on a 7-week sabbatical, took some time off, and I came back and went into his office, and I said, Neil, I think I'm going to resign. I think I'm done at this point. Now I'll go find something else. And he says, well, I'm really sorry to hear you say that because I have this project with this guy who wants to make games, a Hollywood guy, and I think you'd be perfect for it. You might know him, Steven Spielberg. And I'm like, bastard. Well, of course I have to reconsider for that. And he says, he's working on another game with Doug Church and all this stuff, but he wants to do more games, and we don't have a team put together, but he needs a creative lead. And he goes, I really sold him on your background and everything. I think you'd be great. So of course I stayed. Why wouldn't you? Like Lion King story earlier.
Yeah.
And then talked to Steven, and he really wanted to make this physics game. He was really hot on the Wii. And so he wanted to make a physics game on the Wii. And, never mind the fact that the Wii is not exactly the horsepower engine that you would want to be doing real-time physics. But I understood his point, which was the controller was just a natural extension. And, so they wanted me to use the team that was doing, I think it was Medal of Honor Mobile or something like that. I said, I don't want a 60-person team, Neil. I said, not for this. What he's talking about is a lot more experimental. We're going to have to do a lot of prototypes. I need a small team, and I need like the best physics person in the world. And so we found him in Japan and got him to work on our project. And I said the best Nintendo fanboy we could find, we found him, and we got him to work on the project because it's Spielberg. It was a great draw. We got a fantastic producer named Amir Rahimi who now runs Netflix games. We got together a really cool team. It was really fun. We built the first Boom Blox with Spielberg. He was there every week. It was always really weird working with him because we'd be going into a discussion and his phone would ring and he'd pick it up and his assistant Sam would talk to him and he'd go, yeah, just tell him I'll talk to him later. And I'm thinking, oh God, who did he just blow off so he could play our game? It's like, I'm feeling awful about it, but it was fun. I mean, he was such a good guy and just a pleasure to work with. And we made a successful game. It rated really well. It was the highest rated Wii game that EA had for years and years and years after it shipped. And Spielberg wanted to do a tablet version of Boom Blox, and with a side action rubber band scroll, which he described Angry Birds to a T. But EA Mobile was like, no, there's too many Nokia phones and everything out there. We can't build a sales model around a tablet game because it requires tablets to become hugely successful, and we don't know that they will.
Damn, I really believed in Boom Blox. I had a ton of fun playing it when it came out, and I think it would have really clicked with the mobile gaming audience that was just getting ready to explode in the 2010s. But in hindsight, EA's decision to decline Boom Blox on tablets makes sense as the mobile gaming market is not the $150 billion industry that it is today. Timing just didn't align with EA on this one. Louis Castle would finish up his work with EA in 2009, shipping Boom Blox Bash Party as his last title, and now he was a free agent. He decides to stay in Las Vegas and works for a new company called Instant Action, which worked on games that streamed directly to the browser, and then moves on to Zynga during all those pre-mobile, pre-IPO days. That must have been pretty wild. And remember, he's still in Las Vegas, so there's opportunities with gaming and casino companies like Shuffle Master, which he does a 2-year stint at. Hold with me here, I'm trying to fast forward through like 15 years of history, okay? He then heads up Relentless Studios to help ship Amazon's first live service game on PC, Crucible, and then eventually works for a company called Green Park Sports, which has its own interesting spin on sports predictions. And I can see the pattern here. Each one of these companies are setting out to exploit a large money potential in the market. Some have entrenched players, and others are just pure blue ocean strategy. So that brings us to the end of 2022. Louis, what else do you got for us?
After my very early days of Westwood, where I was not burning the candle at both ends, but I was throwing it in the microwave and just hitting burn, and then doing that a couple times in my career, I finally just said, "Okay, I'm going to take a month off." Went on vacation. At the end of the month, I said, "Okay, fine. I'm going to start looking for work." Changed my LinkedIn profile, and I got a call from Christy Stoll over at Deviation Games and said, "Would you consider coming to Deviation Games? We need somebody to help with production and such." And I said, I'll talk. And I talked to Dave Anthony, who's the CEO and founder. He's a wonderful person. And all of the things about the company just lined up with me as far as like what they're all about, as far as leave your ego at the door. It's all about making a great game. We want to be kind to each other. We want to do it the right way. I still feel like it's the closest thing to Westwood's vibe that I've ever seen. So it's really exciting.
That is an incredible story, going from, being a kid, not knowing much about business or anything, can't even cash your first check, to, you're building multi-billion-dollar, billion-dollar companies, and now you're really settling in on a place.
Yeah, I'm back in games full force. Maybe not throwing the candle in the microwave, but I'm definitely burning it at both ends again.
Oh, wow.
And I love it. It's really exciting, and I feel like there's some point in the future there's still more games in me. I always have ideas. I've got a few percolating that I haven't really kind of committed to paper or anything yet, and I really just like helping the team make sure we can get to a great vision.
So what game was Deviation Games working on? Unfortunately, it's still a mystery to all of us, because in March of 2024, after filming this interview, Sony shut down Deviation before they revealed what they were working on. 23 and 24 have been awful years for the game industry. And as of the publishing of this video, there have been over 20,000 job losses in the last 18 months that I'm keeping count here. After the closure of Deviation Games, I got a chance to speak privately with Lewis Castle about his feelings about the entire closure. Maybe about like a month after it happened. And to my surprise, he didn't seem to be looking back at what he could have done better. I can tell that Lewis just has this default mode of marching forward regardless of the situation. And that's what I love about Titans. They never seem to be fazed by major setbacks in their life. But make no misjudgment. This is a time of uncertainty for everyone involved in the game industry. Many game developers have taken the brunt of layoffs, which have resulted in an outpouring of anger over leadership who have folded studios, sometimes with critically successful games. On the flip side, we're seeing the start of unionization in the AAA industry. And we're also seeing the firing and deprioritization of DEI teams inside of companies. All of these factors are going to change our game industry into something new. And look, I know that these topics I listed could just fuel several episodes. But today I want to focus on the game developers who are looking for guidance on how to stay in this industry that we all love. I wanted to sit down for a second interview to get Lewis's thoughts on the shifts in the industry, but unfortunately, we just couldn't find the time. But I want all of you looking for the next job to listen to his next advice, because Lewis has seen the ups and downs in this industry, and I think he knows a thing or two about longevity. I'm hearing this whole story here, and for some Titans that I've interviewed, their story's over, they're retired, and I'll ask them the question, what would you do differently? I don't think that that's appropriate for here, because you're still in it. If there was some sort of wisdom that you could impart on them, what is the thing that they should focus on?
I know, and this is going to sound a little funny, but I think the first thing that you have to, that I believe, and it's not for everybody, but for me personally, just be kind. The very first one. And that's what got me attracted to a Deviation. It's the thing that, despite Westwood shenanigans and everything, it was a very kind company. We had some moments that were difficult, but we always wanted to do the right thing. We always wanted to go to work. It's the place you wanted to go to work every day. You knew it was going to be a fun time. And I used to tell my kids when they went to school every day, I was tell them, be kind and do your best. So that's the second piece of advice, which is really, I've been saying this for decades, 30 years plus, 35 years plus. Be kind, do your best, believe in yourself. There's always going to be somebody that tells you, you can't do this, you can't do that. But honestly, you can probably do just about anything you want to do. You may not be able to do it to the same level as other people. I used to tell my kids this all the time, and you may not have the innate talent to be the very best artist, but you're probably, with a lot of intestinal fortitude and effort, you can be good enough to make a living. And if it's what you enjoy doing, that's the best thing in life, is to have that. And I know those sound like kind of meta for people that are probably watching this, but it's what led to a great life for me. The opportunities will present themselves when you follow those kind of axioms, because if you believe in yourself and you're doing your best work, and I want everybody that I'm working with to be doing the best work of their career. That's the goal. And opportunities are out there all the time. It just doesn't always sound like an opportunity. Sometimes it sounds like a boondoggle, or it sounds like a dead end. It sounds like, gee, I'm going to go play around with computers instead of going for architecture. Or, it sounds like, what do you mean you're going to change the way that people distribute casino games, right, online? It's like, why would you do something different? We already have an established way of doing it. I was like, yeah, it's crap. There's much better ways to do it, right? It's the confidence, bordering maybe even on arrogance, of saying, there's probably a better way to do this. That's believing in yourself. And I think so many times we're convinced by others that we can't do something, or we're convinced by data or reading, or it's hard. And it's like, yeah, but that's what's fun about life, is finding new things, learning new things, having new discoveries. So if you're out there and you're an entrepreneur and you're watching this and you're like, how do I have a life like Lou Castle? It's like, just keep believing in yourself and chase every dream. Don't let everybody tell you that you're an artist, so you can't be a programmer. You're a programmer, so you can't be a designer. You're a designer, so you can't be a finance person. You never had finance, so how can you be in a finance role when you've never had an accounting class in your life? And it turns out all of those things are possible. Everything's possible, and you have so many resources now that we certainly didn't back in the day. With the internet is just a wealth of information. So, I think that's what I tell people, is that. And you asked me earlier if there would be anything I would do differently, or would I be asked that? I don't think so. Like, there's not many things I would change. And it's not that if they had gone differently, I wouldn't have been happy. I think I probably would have been just as happy if they had gone a different way. Maybe the one thing when I was, I think I lost a little bit of faith in myself when we were doing the stuff with IAC, and I didn't convey the kind of confidence that I should have. In a couple of situations, which might have led to us shutting down a bunch of the things that we did, and I take responsibility for that. I didn't. I should have always had faith, even if the road ahead looks hard. There's always, what people want in a leader, and what investors want in a leader is they want that sense of confidence. And I was kind of mad and maybe a little down on myself and feeling like that things weren't going to work out. And you should never let yourself get in that space. As a leader especially, you should be positive, because you'll figure it out. It'll work out. And even if it doesn't, so go do something else. It's not like the world comes to an end. We're making games. We're not trying to cure cancer. Nobody dies if we get it wrong. So
that is so wonderful to hear.
Yeah, it's fun. It's what I'm in the industry for anyways, is to just chase my dreams and keep chasing them.
Well, thank you very much. Louis Castle, living the best life. There you go.
There, absolutely. It's been fun. Yeah, I skipped over all the mobile game stuff too.
Wow, what an awesome message. Be kind, be humble. The be kind part is not one that I hear often, but it makes sense to me when I think about it. I can think about stories where an all-star cast of devs get assembled, but then they're unable to ship a game because they aren't capable of respecting someone else's opinion in the room. On the other hand, sometimes you see indie developers who are just kind of green and up and coming, but they're kind to one another, and they're able to ship amazing breakout titles because they're doing their best. That combination of be kind and do your best is powerful, and something I think we should contemplate more. And after hearing this whole story, I couldn't help but to think about the incredible level of perseverance Louis has. No matter how far away his family was, no matter the deadlines, he delivered. And I think one lesson to learn here is just ship on time while treating the project with the best quality you can deliver. A lot of early wins Westwood Studios had was because they could hit deadlines above quality and do it consistently. It also helped that Louis had a technical brilliance for solving all kinds of problems. But unlike many engineers I know, Louis wasn't sidelined just to the engineering discipline. He took the uncomfortable path and branched out to new subjects like business, which ultimately primed him for the executive suite of larger gaming companies. What surprised me most about Louis's story was his reasoning for quitting the full ride scholarship to college. Louis was just like any other 20-year-old looking for cash and just saw the computer as a means to making it. But oh boy, did Louis do well for himself. Between the sale of his company to Virgin Interactive and then again to EA, he had the option to retire early. Twice! Have a comfortable life! Call it a day! But Titans are always passionate about the work they do, and Lewis chose the path of the creator. He talked about microwaving that candle, but it seemed to keep regenerating in the years to come, and he is still creating games regardless of the circumstances. That kind of endurance is what separates the greats from the Titans. And I think it just goes to show, if you have the resources and the willpower, and if you believe in something, if you do it long enough, you will be successful. I was also surprised by the 5 game at a time strategy they had. Now, it served Westwood well for nearly 2 decades, but ironically, this same strategy ended Westwood. It's easy to see why when you look back in history. The PC gaming market was growing rapidly in capability and number of players. The marketing budgets just to reach players was ballooning, along with the cost to produce the games themselves. These market shifts called for a big strategy shift, which Lewis is well aware of now, but when you're in the middle of one, it can be difficult to do the right thing or to do something that goes against how the money's being made right now. I think we as business leaders need to constantly question ourselves and look for these market shifts, because even though a strategy might have been working in the past, it doesn't always work forever. Well, that's it for the documentary. If you liked it, please leave a thumbs up, lets us know to make more of these. And if you can't get enough of Titans of the Industry, take a look at this other interview that we did with Warren Davis. He's the creator of the cultural arcade icon Q*bert and talks about his journey to the video game industry that ultimately led him into the arcade giant's hallways of Midway Games. I've been your host, Alexander Mejia, and Titans of the Industry is a production of Human Interact, in which I'm also the co-founder of. Editing this episode was done by Ken Joyner, and the music was composed by Kirkwood West. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.